First of all, we will start off with the work session. Do we have any? Do you have anything for meeting follow-up, Mr. City
I
Manager?
do not.
Does anybody on council have anything for meeting follow-up?
Thanks, Mayor. I just wanted to make sure we had a couple folks speak about code violations and stuff last week, so I was just curious if we ever did end up connecting with them. I wanted to make sure that we took care of their concerns to whatever extent we were able, but also I was really concerned to hear about potential human waste contamination in stormwater or waterways, and so I just wanted to follow up to see if we connected with those folks.
Mr. Mayor, we have been working on that case and a series of cases in that neighborhood and with those particular neighbors for quite some time. And as a matter of fact, we've been dealing with a number of those issues successively for probably a few years now. So these properties are known to us, the issues are known to us, and indeed, efforts to try to enforce what we can are underway and have been underway. So the short answer is yes, we are. There is a longer answer though. There usually is, right?
Anything else? Then I guess at this time, I will turn it over to you, Mr. City Manager, to go through the budget.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And thank you everybody for being here tonight. As you all know, this is our opportunity to officially deliver the budget to you and share with you a number of the themes and design strategies and so forth as it relates to presenting a $193 million budget for your formal adoption, the adoption of which takes place the third week in June, as you all know. So tonight, essentially, begins your formal deliberation. And with that, we have handed you a companion piece to tonight's discussion in narrative form that you can use from this night forward as it relates to checking a lot of the data that we've talked about tonight. Refer to that document with respect to a lot of the data that we covered tonight, and use as a means of doing a little bit of a deeper dive, if you care to, with respect to a number of the other themes throughout the budget. I think with the narrative that you have on hand, with what you take in tonight, and with respect to the book that we gave you already, the budget book, you will know everything we know about the budget, and hopefully equip you appropriately to be able to pass the budget again on the third Tuesday in June, coming up here real soon. So with that, Mr. Mayor, I want to take a quick minute to thank the staff team. What you see here is certainly a culminating work that have had a lot of hands engaged in making it happen. The budget book, of course, is the large representation of that body of work. The narrative is a representation of that body of work. The presentation, none of this was done by one and by anybody alone. So I am very grateful for the staff team that helped put all this together, and the department heads that collated the numbers and everything else. Great effort on the part of many. As I mentioned, tonight you'll be hearing details about a $193 million budget. And I want to tell you right from the beginning, that is a smaller budget than what you passed last year. Not by much, but it certainly is smaller than what you passed last year. And as you know, having gone through this a couple of times now, that generally is the function of what it is that you have on your capital agenda that makes that difference from year to year, typically. A good example to kind of demonstrate that point is certainly when you look at the overall numbers here, and you compare the overall numbers to the general fund in and of itself, you'll notice that the general fund only goes up 4% in total. That large segment of costs and the services that it provides overall, on the whole, is going up 4%. But your overall budget is dropping by some $6 or $7 million. So there's a lot at play, and certainly a lot of complexities that hopefully we can go through together in a way that you'll find very satisfactory and hopefully helpful and informative. But please, as we go through this, however, don't hesitate to ask questions. Don't hesitate to bring up points of discussion that we may need to. That's why we're here. This is for your purposes, your consumption. And we want to be sure that we can get through all the items that you want to talk about. So to begin, just to kind of give you a few elements of overview and get this thing working here appropriately, because it's not. I want to tell you that we are presenting a budget to you that is balanced. Okay, as I mentioned at the very beginning, you actually do have some cost centers that are rising very, very modestly. You have some cost centers that are not rising at all, and in some cases actually decreasing in their expense. But on the whole, we are presenting a budget to you that is balanced and does not depend on reserves to operate. Although, as you will see here and probably recall, we are using reserves for several key capital leverages that we want to put forward. For that purpose, you have the opportunity to determine whether or not those selected and, strategic uses of revenues are appropriate. Thank you. One of the things I want to tackle right from the very, very beginning that tends to be sort of an overarching theme as it relates to local government discussion and people's views and assumptions in general is that indeed we're passing a budget that is one where we're taking more money than we need and all those kinds of things. And in some respect, overtaxing the citizens of Casper. I would tell you that is not the case, but let me expand upon that concept a little bit as it relates to your budget and what you are considering here over the next 3 weeks. Indeed, we do watch very, very closely the role in which one-time revenue plays with expenses in the budget. So when we do talk about one-time revenue or non-recurring revenue or revenue that you can't count on a regular basis, or wouldn't be wise to count on a regular basis. Grants would be a good example of that. We do not try to blend those kinds of revenues with expenses that are recurring and happen year after year after year and are perennial in nature. We use operational revenue for that. So sales tax revenue, for example, franchise fees, money that we get from the state through MRGs and so on. Mineral revenue and loyalties. Thank you. Not MRGs in the sense of revenue guarantees that we talked about more early in the year. Those two are the same acronyms. Those are all operational revenues that we use for operational expenses. We can count on those revenues. We can plan on those revenues. One-time revenues, we can't. So we are very careful about how those dollars are used and what expenses are used against. And the reason I say that is because when you look at a very cursory fashion at the overall revenues compared to the expenses in this budget that we're asking you to support, you will notice that we are about $7 million to the good on the revenue side of the ledger, and that we don't have as many as in that way of expenses. That is good news, but it's not as good a news as you might think. Mostly because a large part of those revenues are revenues that come from 1-cent dollars that right now, at this moment in time, are in a surplus fashion, or at least they feel like that. And that's because at this moment in the 4-year cycle, the 1-cent revenues are doing better than projected. by about $3 or $4 million. That doesn't mean, however, that I'm prepared to come to you and say, hey, it looks like 1 cent 17 is going to generate $3 or $4 million more than we thought. Therefore, let's plan on some more streets projects or whatever. Let's build Metro with that money, right? The reason I'm not prepared to say that is because we have 2.5 more years to go in our current 1 cent cycle, and we don't know how those remaining years are going to perform. And therefore, we've got to be careful that if those years don't perform as well, they may very well suck up those current surpluses that we're receiving to balance out at the end of the cycle or actually perform in a deficit position. So right now, it looks like a surplus, but in 4 years, it may not. So we're hesitant to call it a windfall or, hey, we got more money to do other projects. We have a similar situation in direct distribution, wherein we're getting also about $3 or $4 million more to the good than we thought we would get. And that is strictly a function of what it is that the legislature decided to award at this moment in time. Direct distribution, as you know, is not money that we use for operational purposes anymore. We do use them for subsidies, and we do use those dollars for one-time expenses that maybe the general fund would have to absorb if it didn't exist. But in order to perform the operations of the general fund, we do not recommend any of those surpluses from direct distribution to be applied toward expenses that you'd like to see covered in the general fund. So from that standpoint, when you do see a surplus, I want you to look at that surplus with somewhat of a guarded eye, because at this moment in time, we're not comfortable if those dollars are available to pursue other projects that aren't on your immediate horizon or aren't already adopted via the capital budget that we discussed earlier in the year, and that you'll see reflected into in the budget that you have in front of you. Okay, so that's one point that I would make about this particular myth. The second point that I would make, and this kind of goes into that a little bit further, is that conversely, we try real thoroughly to watch operational revenues as well, that they don't bleed over into one-time expenses either. So if, for example, you ever get the accusation that, hey, why are you building this road when you haven't been able to hire enough cops to patrol our streets? The fact is, we don't use money that we would hire anybody with to build streets. So I want you to, be aware of that distinction, because again, in the spirit of talking very fundamentally about how we put the budget together, those are one of the cardinal rules that we try to observe every single year. Every time we come to you with an expense request or a project proposal, I want you to feel comfortable that those dollars that we use on either side of that ledger are true to the form of what it is that we need those expenses to be supported by. Okay, so on the one hand, we talk about one-time expenses, not supporting operations. I want you to know we are not interested in using operational money to try to build projects either. Okay, and these bullets kind of detail that information in a little more thoroughly. I want you to be aware too that we've talked from time to time about the idea of cross-pollination. And I don't know if that's the best term necessarily, but what I'm trying to say essentially is when it comes to doing projects and doing things, we don't use dollars from other funds in order to make things occur. Like, for example, when we talk about the water fund here in a little bit, you're going to note and recall that expenses from the water fund really are only meant to deal with, or I should say revenue from the water fund are really only meant to deal with expenses in the water fund or projects in the water fund, laying water lines or dealing with the water treatment plant or whatever the case may be pertinent to the water system itself. We're not going to try to use dollars from Metro, for example, to offset costs in the water fund, or vice versa. And similarly, we're not going to do, except in really, really specific cases, take dollars from other funds to subsidize the water fund, except where, as you'll see here in a minute, you have purposely authorized the use of 1 cent dollars to make things happen in the water fund in order for water rates to go further. And we'll talk about that a little more here in successive slides. So indeed, when we're talking about overtaxing our citizens, I would say that's positively not the case. It may be the case that some folks would want to point to reserves to say, oh yeah, look at all the money the city's sitting on in the form of savings accounts and reserves and so forth. As a way to try to say that we're just stockpiling dollars and don't have any real use for them, and therefore we don't need to approach citizens for more money. We don't need to talk about rates, et cetera, et cetera. The thing that I would have you remember about reserves is that the vast majority of the reserves that you oversee are dollars that are tied up from a policy standpoint pertaining to those dollars and the ways in which we can leverage capital projects to take place, or the means by which we are trying to do a number of things for specific funds. Okay, $39 million, as a matter of fact, is tied up in policy-driven reserve balances, 16.9 of which is in the general fund. And as you know, in the general fund, as that first bullet says, that is equivalent to roughly 120 days of operations for the general fund. So in my world, while that's nice to have, that's not a huge margin pertaining to some of the cataclysmic things that can occur from time to time and the need that you may have for those dollars on a very emergency or critical basis. That, like I said, 120 days worth can be eaten up pretty quickly. That's one example of, and obviously a larger example. You can see some of the other funds that we have here and what these reserves amount to. As we go through some of the other funds that we'll talk about in greater detail here in just a little bit, water distribution has an operating balance of 3.4 million, which represents 90 days roughly of operations in the water fund, water distribution in particular. You can see what it looks like in sewer and wastewater, the plant in particular, specifically, as we go through this list. This is solid waste. And again, 90 days is what we look at from an operations standpoint. We obviously have other capital goals that we try to hit here, which amounts to depreciation levels that we're trying to match and keep on hand. And where we have debt, we have to maintain a reserve as well. Fortunately, we don't have a lot of debt. And I would tell you that's because we've worked really hard to try to leverage grants as much as possible with dollars that we have on hand for matching purposes, and avoid long-term debt as much as we can. Moving on to revenue. Let's talk much more about a revenue-centric piece of our budget. And as we talk about sales and use tax, you know that we're talking a lot about the general fund right now. Sales and use tax is without a doubt one of our largest revenue sources for the general fund. And the general fund happens to be the fund that is the most vulnerable fund that we have, because it's the least planned fund that you have the opportunity to manage and oversee. And I'll demonstrate what that means here in a little bit. Let's review this information real quickly if we could. Some of you have had in the interim here, since the last time we visited about the budget, questions along these lines as to what it is that the city shares with regard to purchases that are made here in our borders within the limits of the city. So for every dollar of purchases that we have broken out here, and the 4% that comes back to the government, if you will, the piece that I would draw your attention to of that 4 cents, I'd like you to look at that red number there towards the top of the spreadsheet here, the chart here. That 0.0088 cents is what is retained with the city of Casper. Okay, so every part of that 4 cents that's generated here locally through the base tax rate, the city of Casper gets to keep that figure that amounts to that 0.04 cents. Okay, the state, as you can see, on the other hand, within that figure right above that, that is essentially what they get to keep. So when you see that 69% figure there at the very top in that middle column, that's what they lay claim to with regard to that dollar that's spent here in Casper within our limits. So, and I shouldn't say within our limits, I would say it's probably closer to say, more appropriate to say. Excuse me. Sorry, I'm getting over a cold and I'm not my typical melodic self. And I apologize for that.
What was that word again?
Melodic,
I think you made it up.
real word, real
We'll
word.
have to look that up.
Just-
We are digressing.
Make him spell
I know.
Part,
He wants to use those $10 words.
I'm sorry. Very good, thank you. The state lays claim to 69% of what it is we generate locally. And, you know, that's a figure that I think we do need to remember. It's a figure that can be difficult to plan around, particularly in comparison to what some of our competitor states enjoy by way of what they get to keep locally. When we look at the actual 1% program, however, this is the base tax rate, right? When we look at 1% in particular, the numbers do improve quite a bit for us. As you can see here, looking at those red figures, we get to keep 73% of what is generated here in the county through the 1 cent program. And that's good news. That allows us to do the projects that we propose to you through the 1 cent program, the support that we provide to other agencies and so on. Certainly a much more lucrative program for the city and locally when indeed we're talking about the local option. Quite a bit different when you look at these previous numbers. Okay, it doesn't go backwards. I was going to go backwards, but there we go. Yeah, quite a bit different, dramatically different, almost flip-flopped, if you will. Well, it is flip-flop when we talk about 1 cent. Moving on. This is an interesting slide. And I want to bring this up to you because this is another way in which we talk about local control and Casper's ability to control its own destiny with regard to the dollars that we are fortunate to be able to receive. If you look at the larger circle on my left, your right, you can see that is meant to be a graphical representation of the $55 million that the city will receive in FY25 through the general fund. And that's to do all of the services that the general fund supports, and you know what those services are. If you combine the red piece of that pie and the blue piece of that pie, you see very quickly that by far the largest majority of the figures represented in the combined value of those two pieces of pie represents a lot of the dollars that come to the general fund, and incidentally are dollars that are not controlled on a local level. Those are all dollars that are decided independent of council direction, independent of council's wishes, independent of your citizens' wishes pertaining to the services that those are meant to support. Now, that doesn't mean you don't get to make service decisions and how those services are delivered. But when it comes to funding those services, you are very much in the minority for those services that you are 100% responsible for. So it's a real interesting dichotomy that cities and towns in Wyoming have to work around, in that you're responsible for 100% of the services that are tendered through the general fund, but you only have independent authority of, what is it, 15%?
28%.
Thank you, 28%, thank you. Didn't quite make that number out. Very much a minority position with respect to decision-making authority that you are expected to provide services for. Now, when you break that local control piece out a little bit, then of course you need to look at the smaller circle there, and it goes into some detail with respect to what that includes. And as you know, that includes franchise fees that you get to dictate through franchise agreements to some degree. It includes non-operating revenue, which typically means investment income that you have delegated, decision-making authority to some respect to a committee that helps you with that, the investment committee. And you can also talk about fines and those kinds of things. You do have decision-making authority in that respect, but that is really it. And as we just clarified, that's only about 28% of the picture. So that is the challenge that you walk into these kinds of discussions with. And when it comes to sales tax revenue, that's why you have to be just abundantly cautious about what sales tax revenue is doing. It leads the way in terms of what you're expected to provide by way of the services through the general fund. Here's what you did, and here's what the community did. Here's what the economy did, if you will, pertaining to sales and use tax in fiscal year 23. Not a bad year. When you drop the budget year that we are in currently, it appears as though fiscal year 24 actually performed a little better. This is what we think is going to happen with respect to fiscal year 25. Am I reading that right?
It's 24 and 24 budget.
Oh, excuse me. Okay. 24 and 24 budget goes good to 25.
Yep.
There we go. The dash line represents what it is that we think fiscal year 25 is going to do for sales and use taxes. You will note that we do not anticipate this revenue stream being aggressive or being overly optimistic. In fact, what we have done, pardon me, what we have done is we've taken the actuals from fiscal year 24 as we know them to be right now, and we've essentially added a growth factor of 1.5% on top of that to try to predict the entirety of fiscal year 25. So at the end of the day, if you take into account the current surpluses, if you will, and the activity that we've experienced so far, and in fact, added only a modicum of growth to those particular positives that we've had in this revenue stream, you could argue that we may be talking about a 6% growth year over year from what we budgeted to what we're proposing for 25. But again, keep in mind, that's only taking what we know for actuals right now and adding a Craig recommended 1.5% on top of what we've incurred from an actual standpoint. In my estimation, that is not overly ambitious. And I would also say I don't have a lot of data that would suggest right now at this moment in time that we should take a position that is less aggressive or with absolutely zero growth, or in fact, take on a retractionary position as it relates to this particular revenue stream. Let me give you some more data as it relates to what we see sales and use tax doing right now. One of the charts that I really like is this one, comparing over time. And that would be, this is roughly a 10-year moment in time as it relates to this revenue stream. The trajectory is positive, despite what we've seen in recent years where there's been significant declines economically. We're still in a positive direction, and I'm happy to see that. You can see at the very tail end, my right on the chart here, what that looks like pursuant to FY24 and what we're projecting for 25 with those little lines there. Again, I don't think too far outside of what we can anticipate reasonably well. Moving on to another historical perspective, many would consider 2014 as being a fairly red letter year with regard to performance here in our local economy. And you can see that captured in the blue. The red is what we're seeing right now. And in many ways, we're seeing some positive. In some ways, we're seeing some declines. But on the whole, when compared to one of our more positive years, we're not doing too bad. We're not doing too bad. From an industry standpoint, and you can see what some of those categories are. Retail trade is the one that dominates a lot of our landscape here in Natrona County. And comparing the 2 years to the
It's too far away.
together, that's pretty optimistic and positive. We all having problems reading the headings? So am I. I promise you that center one is retail trade. Mining is off to the far left over there, where the blue line sort of dominates the red line there. Yeah, that way. Okay. My left, your right.
Mining, utilities, construction,
Manufacturing,
manufacture.
wholesale trade.
Wholesale trade.
Yeah, mining,
Yeah.
which is oil and gas.
Sure.
And this was 14. That was the big year.
Yep.
64 rigs running in the state,
That's right. Compared to how many now?
under 20.
Under 20, yeah. I believe it. Okay, I apologize for the lack of clarity. And that is frustrating, but we'll trudge forward. Again, another historical perspective as it relates to the sales taxes in recent years, fiscal years in particular. We can kind of see a pattern developing there, and I don't see us being too far off of that pattern. Let's talk about the general fund more specifically. However, that's obviously one major revenue stream. We have others, as we talked about earlier. You will see in your budget book that we really don't have a lot of large increases in any of the revenue streams. In fact, the sales tax revenue stream projection is going to be the largest by way of percentage growth that you'll see. Next to perhaps probably building permit fees. And I would tell you in building permit fees, although that's a very small, relatively small category in the general fund overall revenue strategy, we're basing that primarily on projects and undertakings that we are aware of and are in some degree of being underway. It looks very positive as well, but still a smaller portion of what the general fund depends on. Let's break down the general fund in more detail here. We are pleased to report that over and above reserves and the restrictions and requirements that we have in the general fund overall, we believe that for fiscal year 24, it will end with $2.5 million to the good. And so to me, that's almost a fund equity statement, if you will, with regard to cash that's available and unencumbered and not tied up with any other mandate or directive or whatever. So you will start your fiscal year with this balance on hand in the general fund. When you add the activity of the general fund into the picture, you can see revenues, what that looks like. We're anticipating, as I mentioned earlier, about $55 million in revenues. When you bring the expenses into the picture, we are similarly anticipating, expenses in the neighborhood of $55 million, particularly as it relates to some of the positions that we're going to be talking to you about here in just a few minutes. Pardon me again, I'm really sorry. And that's what that impact would be for the general fund in particular. The total expenditures compared against the total revenues look very similar. Would be correct. That means that there is really no additional cash activity for the general fund and the fund equity, which means that for fiscal year 25, we're anticipating that you will have that exact same $2.5 million to operate with over and above what the requirement for the reserves will be to start fiscal year 20, to end fiscal year 25 with as well. And that, of course, assumes that expenses come in as budgeted, that revenues come in as budgeted, and that we don't have other ancillary projects or needs that would otherwise consume that funding. Examples, however, of things that have consumed that cash balance funding in the past, which I'm going to run the cursor right here. We just recently took out several, a lot of money with regard to balancing the jail budget because it came in way over than what we expected. And we talked about this in a recent work session. I can't remember when exactly, but this balance helped support that. When we talk about doing one-time payments for employees, if we have these dollars available, this will often be the place that we go to for those kinds of expenses, should council ever decide they want to do a one-time expense or whatever of that nature. So these dollars do play a critical function for us. And at this point in time, we're not anticipating anything to impact those dollars and, deal with that balance or negatively affect that balance. Okay. Any questions about the general fund thus far? All right. Well, let's talk about some of the biggest expenses that this fund oversees, and that is with respect to staffing. The general fund is obviously a very service-intensive family of operations, and you have to have employees and people to provide those services, as you all know. We do anticipate the need for additional staffing this fiscal year 25. In fact, we think we need about 10 new full-time positions and 3 regular part-time positions, which is obviously a much smaller impact. That you saw the combined value for the general fund was about $300,000 in new positions. These are the positions that we are looking for. And what I would like to do is take a moment to go over these positions with you so that indeed you can see what it is, the need is for these roles and how critical these positions are for them to make this short list of requested positions. Because mind you, the department heads would would agree that they actually have needs beyond this. And some of those positions that they requested beyond this list obviously didn't make this final cut, as it were. So, in my mind, this 10 position request is kind of the most critical of the critical needs that the department has identified to our committee that helped evaluate not only the critical nature of these needs, but the affordability of these positions. And as you can see at the bottom right over here, the enterprise-wide cost to fund these positions is this figure right here. So with regard to the 307,000 in the general fund, that's obviously a portion of that. The other half, of course, of that, or a larger portion of that comes out of utilities for the most part, and in some of the other smaller funds. If we could, real quick, I would like to talk about the deputy building official for a moment. And for that, we've got Liz on the Zoom sphere or Teams, ready to visit with us. We also have some of her team here tonight to walk through some of the other details or questions that you might have. And so Liz, can I have you talk to us about that for just a second?
Certainly. So, Mr. Mayor, members of council, this is a new position that the Community Development Department submitted in December when we were looking at personnel needs for the upcoming year. This position, as I indicated in Carter's message, does pertain a lot to the livability goal. And what we have really been working with since last summer with addressing the issues with hazardous abandoned buildings and the work that Justin Scott, who is our chief building official, has undertaken along with his team, has really put some new demands, as well as a lot of new needs for public outreach, engagement within the city organization. And I think to be successful with this, and we're seeing such positive feedback from the citizens that what we're doing from a building standpoint and addressing, again, based on your direction, issues with rundown vagrant properties, that this is something we would like to continue into fiscal year 25. With that, a lot of the additional work of inspections and working with our contractors, ongoing desire to look for additional revenue sources, perhaps even with some of the opportunities that we have with training other building divisions around the state with some of the ICC codes. I think our division within the Community Development Department is truly a leader across the state, and I'm very pleased with the work that Justin and his team have done. So what we've looked at is this deputy building official that will truly be another arm for Justin and the work that he continues to do, but also the ability to advance our division throughout the region, and to make certain that we're up on codes and licensing and working consistently with our contractors, being aware of the new appeals board that has been put in place. So again, this is moving us forward. So that was the reason that we proposed this in December, and have really continued this spring to feel that this is the right decision to make. And we've done a lot of work behind the scenes on this. And I know Justin's in the audience tonight, and we would be happy to take any questions that you might have for us.
Questions from council? Looks like we're good. Thank you, Liz.
Of course, Your Honor.
He's not going to go too far away here. One of the other positions that her department is requesting is with respect to her oversight of the parking fund. I don't know if you knew that or not, but Liz oversees that fund. And as a part of that, we are trying something a little different this year, wherein we want to hire a parking enforcement officer through the parking fund, which, as you'll notice in your budget book, makes the parking fund look like it's just going through the roof in terms of its expenses and that kind of thing, because we haven't had an employee in there for quite some time. In order to be able to be dedicated to parking enforcement in the downtown area and other adjacent areas where that help might be needed. We are excited about this, not only because, we are really hoping to try a different way, another way to maintain parking enforcement in the downtown area. We're excited about this too, because we believe that we can also use this position to potentially generate some revenue, albeit not dollar for dollar to pay for this position, but certainly some revenue that would help to support the parking structure and some of the other parking fund efforts that this oversees. And so while it is a different approach, there's a couple of reasons that we need this approach to be taken this year, not the least of which is parking enforcement in general. But that other strategy as well will help support a parking structure that we really don't have a revenue answer for right now, or at least not a sufficient one. And this may prove not to be a sufficient one option either, but nonetheless, we want to take a run at this and hoping that you'll support that. Liz, do you have anything you want to add to that initiative?
This initiative came out of the 2019 downtown parking study that I think many of you on council were a part of. That was an MPO study. And we're looking forward to bringing this through with code enforcement and taking advantage of combining the parking along with the opportunity to do some downtown interaction with our downtown merchants, and kind of running this idea through the DDA as well as through the DCBA. There was a lot of positive reaction from the downtown merchants of us being able to get out on the street and not only look at the enforcement aspect with patrons that might be parked in the same spot all day long on the street, which we've heard about for years, but actually be able to talk with the merchants and find out what some of their needs are, as well as the patrons that are out wanting to shop downtown. So as Carter indicated, this is an opportunity to look at truly taking the parking spaces that we have on the street and being able to rotate them enough that we can see actual patronage of the parking garage, which we're continuing with Republic forward with that, and to get the rotation of the patrons on the street and be able to see more sales occurring within our downtown business population. So we see this again as a livability goal, public engagement, and a chance to get really on the street. Amber Jividen with code enforcement, our code enforcement supervisor, will oversee this. She wants this position to be really boots on the ground and not in a vehicle or a cart, but actually have this employee walking. So we're hoping you'll be able to actually see and hear the output from this. And again, with us wanting to kick this off early this summer, we'll have a baseline to be able to give you ongoing kind of quarterly reports, is what Carter's discussed, so that you all can hear the output from this new position. And again, be happy to entertain any questions.
Thank you, Liz. I was curious what you were thinking as far as shifts for this work. Is it going to be more of an evening weekend shift? Is it going to be Monday through Friday 8 to 5? Thank you.
Excellent question, Councilman. This did come up from the downtown merchants also, and we do see this being on kind of a rotating basis. There's a lot of interest in getting parking enforcement started as early as 6 a.m. But also through the summer months, we know that there is a lot more opportunity downtown with merchants potentially staying open for events. So we do, in discussions with Amber on this, we're looking at opportunities to rotate this and not make it just a straight 8 to 5, but to actually do some rotation and potentially some 10-hour shifts. So that is up for discussion. And of course, if you have input, we would love to hear it. But we have been out, again, getting feedback from downtown merchants on what their thoughts are.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Looks like we've got it again. Thank you, Liz.
Let's move on to the police department. If I can have the chief come on down so we can have some questions answered there too. Their department is requesting a couple positions as well, as you can see, in the form of the digital records technician, which would be funded in part through PSCC, and the kennel technician, which actually amounts to more than just this one full-time position. We're looking for some part-time help there as well. And so, Chief, do you mind if I turn to you to help discuss this a little bit?
Sure. Mayor, council, sorry, let me get a little closer there. The digital records technician, we've had that position, it's currently filled by Jody Decker in the police department. We've had that position for quite some time now. As we predicted when we approached council with that position years ago, we predicted that it was going to rapidly expand. And in fact, her workload is doubled and tripled and quadrupled faster than we anticipated. So the nature of this work is the voluminous number of public information requests that comes into the police department. Whenever those involve one of our body worn camera videos or in-car camera videos, takes significant amounts of redaction to make those releasable. And so the amount of work is expanded far more than just our single FTE can do. This would be a position that would back this up and begin to bring that workload in to a more reasonable amount. So currently we have specific statutory deadlines that we have to meet when we receive those information requests. And without this full-time position, we would not be able to complete our statutory requirements for timeliness in fulfilling these requests. It is absolutely amazing how much the workload has grown as we continue to advance in our digital holdings, the digitizing of a lot of different law enforcement perspectives. This is going to continue to be an issue, so that I would feel very comfortable predicting that this will not be the last time that we're having discussions on the needs that are involved with these information requests and the digital redaction specialists. Did you also want me to talk about the kennel techs already?
If we could check for questions first, that's all right, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Mayor. Thanks, Chief. I was just curious if you had a ballpark idea on how many records requests are we getting? And then I was also curious if Judy, is that our current one? I thought
Jody.
I want to make sure Jody has all the tools she has to do her job efficiently and stuff. And so I was just curious if we're leveraging AI or other tools does she have to watch every video, body cam footage in its entirety, minute by minute, or are there tools she can use to kind of be more quick about that?
Mayor, council, Jody Decker is absolutely one of the hardest working employees in the city. And she's, I would strongly argue, perhaps the most efficient one that we have. The nature of the body worn cameras is especially important because of the things that are going on in the background. Currently, I don't think that the AI technology exists for us to spot everything. So I want you to imagine as one officer is dealing with an incident, but people are walking back and forth in the background. If those persons contain a juvenile, they need redacted. While the officer is handling whatever thing they're doing, other officers are elsewhere in the community, and they are radioing in protected information to dispatch that is being broadcast on the radio and being picked up by this radio. That's got to be redacted. If the officer just looks over to his or her screen in the computer, has a strong chance of having protected information on the computer screen, that would need redacted. So there's so much going on that it's not something that we can yet turn over, although she's developed very efficient systems to kind of reduce the total scope of that down. She's extremely professional, and under her tutelage, we're going to be able to just improve the program that we have. The equipment that she has access to is cutting edge equipment, and she does a very efficient job. The workload is just proceeded way past it. Mr. City Manager, I gave you some stats. Do you have those available? Because I didn't bring them with me today.
I do not.
But while you guys are contemplating other questions, let me see if I can produce those stats.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Mhm.
Ms. Vice Mayor?
So for the records, is it mandatory to have the records turned over? So if there was a record request, how many days is it? Is it a 10-day turnaround time or 2 weeks?
Most public information requests allows 10 days. We can get extensions to that if they are particularly onerous. We just need to be able to respond back within 10 days. Here's the estimated delay. Here's the reason for the delay. But you know, that we do have those, I left my glasses up there. We do have those statutory requirements that we're required to meet and can get us in trouble if we're not meeting them. So Mayor, if I can continue on to answer your questions. The public records request increased by 11% in 2023. Digital record requests, which are far more labor intensive because of all of that redaction, they have increased by 971% in 2023, and year to date in 2024, an additional 355% over that. So when I say Jody Decker is the hardest working employee in the police department, I mean that seriously. It's not an exaggeration. Did that answer your question?
It did. Thank you. Sounds like huge increases. Are we going from 2 to 4 or from 50 to 100?
No, thousands.
We have that many record requests?
Yes, yeah, it's quite serious, yeah.
Wow.
Vice Mayor?
Is there a reason to attribute to why the records request has increased so dramatically in the last year?
Mayor, Vice Mayor, Council, absolutely. The American society has become more accustomed to the presence and availability of this information. So defense attorneys, insurance companies, complainants, neighbors, involved parties, they're all aware that these officers are driving around in cars with video. The officers are wearing these body worn cameras. And so that knowledge of the availability and the usefulness of that product is spread to make this the burden that it has become. We 100% anticipated this. It is something that we absolutely predicted. We kind of may do this long, but we're falling behind and we're just playing catch up is all.
Councilor Pollak?
Thank you. This is just a point of clarification, maybe to Carter. Here it's listed in our full-time positions list, but if I'm reading correctly, the budget document is listed as a half-time on page 243, police admin budget.
I think part,
Please, go ahead. Yes.
Mr. City Manager, Mr. Mayor, I don't mean to interrupt. I believe that it's being covered by different funds. Some of those services are as a result of the PSCC. And so I think we're billing that out appropriately.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Chief.
Mr. Mayor, when it comes to the kennel technician, this council is very aware of the acute needs that we have at the shelter. This kennel tech positions, which is one full-time position and 2 part-time positions, is for the express purposes of us being able to fill our reason for being at the shelter. Currently, the shelter is prone to reaching its maximum capacity. Even when we are at half capacity, the kennel techs, they come early in the morning and they begin the cleanup process from the night before. They work through till essentially the noon hour, just to prepare the animals for prospective adopters, to clean up the kennels. But by the time they have completed the cleaning of the last kennel, The other ones are all now dirty again. And so it's this never ending cycle. So as we've looked at it, and actually managed the workflow of these employees, they have less than 5 minutes of every hour to take a break, get a drink, go to the bathroom, because they are stuck in this never ending cycle. And the purpose for these new positions is to not only break that cycle so that our employees are able to take care of their appropriate mandatory rest breaks and things of that nature. But more importantly, and perhaps just as importantly, let me check my words there. It is our hope that we can now use the unobligated time to acclimate our animals up there so that they are more adoptable, so that we can become to socialize the animals and make them more adoptable, with the end goal of helping to increase adoptions and prevent animals from coming into the shelter in the first place. So these three positions, one full-time employee and two part-time employees, they're extremely critical to us. We are so far out of whack. We're not fulfilling our mission of producing a safe environment where those animals can thrive and prosper. We're providing them a safe environment, but because of the immense workload per employee, we're not able to have that thrive and prosper. That's what we're aiming for.
Any questions about the kennel tax? Councilor Gamble.
Thanks, Chief. Can you please remind us how many kennel technicians we have budgeted currently and if we're fully staffed at the moment?
Mr. Mayor, boy, I'm struggling here I believe that I'm budgeted for 5, and I believe that we are currently fully staffed. However, the staffing is difficult because of different types of family medical leave, things of that nature. Light duty assignments that are part of it. So that's increasing the workload, but even when fully staffed, we don't have enough.
Any other questions? Thank you again, Chief.
Mr. Mayor, to continue down the list here, I'd like to have Bill come up and talk about her needs with respect to an additional accountant. And then maybe I could have Selima be queued up to visit about the recreation supervisor.
Mayor, councilors. So back when I first got here to the city of Casper 3 years ago, we had just gone through, actually when I say just, it had been a couple of years, but we had just gone through a pretty major accounting software change. So in that time, we had not been providing any kind of monthly financial reports to council or the citizens. And that was something that I really thought was important, to provide transparency. So we started into a project where my accountant and my accounting supervisor were the people who really pushed that project forward. We got all the reports done, and now they're out on the internet for everyone. So it takes a lot of time to put all of these reports together. The computer does a lot of it, but it still requires a lot of making sure the numbers are correct, making sure that things are in the correct period. So it does take a lot of extra time. So we expect this position to help us with that. In addition, we also, in our annual audit every year, we have a finding which says, because our auditors prepare our financial statements, there is a risk. And because of that risk, they give us a finding. So to get rid of that finding, and because I think I have staff which is very knowledgeable in how to prepare financial statements, that is something else that this position will do, is it will help us to prepare our financial statements in-house, which this is a huge undertaking and will require quite a bit of time, knowledge, and experience. So we are hoping to find someone who is fantastic and who will help us with that. But again, I have, two other people within the department that are very knowledgeable in this, and they will help us get that rolling. So the final thing that this position will really help us with is, as you all are aware, I think almost every meeting you get to hear about grants that we are trying to go after. The department, out in the departments, they are the ones who are very knowledgeable about the program and what they're trying to do with these grants. But we need the central finance office to also be a partner in those. So we are hoping that this position will also provide us with more grant support for our departments. So that's what we're looking for in this position. Do you have any questions?
Thanks, Mayor. Thanks, Jill. The financial reports that your team is putting together, are you referring to like, when we get updated, like, you know, we're 33% of the way through the fiscal year and this is how we're stacked up compared to the proposed, or are you talking about other ones that maybe I'm not aware of?
No, they are the monthly financial statements. They are put out on the website.
I guess on that note, I would just like to, I know we get them, I think, in our information packets and stuff usually, but I guess I wasn't aware that they were published on the city website, so I would just make sure folks are aware of that. I just typed in City of Casper financial documents and you can get them, so. Thank you.
And I'm assuming too, by you talking about preparing the in-house reports for the audit, that would cut down some of our audit expenses.
That is a great question, Mayor. We will have a little bit of a reduction. It's not a huge expense in our audit expenses, but it will reduce it by about $8,000.
Penny here, penny there, pretty soon you've got some real money, so that's helping.
The one thing I like about that too, Mr. Mayor, is I'm really hoping that with this type of service that we can provide on our own, we can avoid that qualification that we get each year as it relates to preparing our own ACFRs and those kinds of things.
Absolutely. But I thought that might be a little bit of a reduction in our audit. I just wanted to ask that question. So, very good. Thank you. Anybody else?
Just, so we're not required to have a third-party auditor to look at our books?
Your Honor, I would say that we do have that requirement to do the audit. What we don't have the requirement for is to prepare the financial reports and the statements like the ACFR through a third party. So hopefully that's an advantage we gain by bringing on this additional help.
Okay.
One of them, anyway. One of them.
Other questions? Thank you, Jill.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Mayor, councilors, good evening. So in my department, we are requesting one new position, and that is for a recreation supervisor that will be specifically responsible for indoor sports and leagues. And so currently in the Sports and Athletic Fund, which is a newly created fund, there is 1.5 positions dedicated to indoor sports and league programming. And that's our supervisor, and then he has a coordinator that helps him to administer all the league programming that happens at the recreation center indoors. So volleyball, basketball, pickleball, those kinds of things. We feel like that one person has a very limited capacity to expand our rec league programming because there are so few of them. This was actually a change that happened in about fiscal year 19, where before that, 2 positions did exist. There were 2 specific positions dedicated to athletic maintenance and then indoor leagues and sports programming. Those 2 positions were combined primarily in an effort to improve communication between those who were programming athletic fields and those who were maintaining the athletic fields, because there were some overlap that was causing issues with not only our user groups, but the maintenance of the fields because they were being overplayed essentially to keep them healthy. However, now under Nick Whips, our new rec manager, we feel like it is necessary in order to grow programming to split those positions, but since they will both report to the same division manager, we feel like the communication will remain strong and we won't have those same issues. And so right out the gate, Nick and I feel very strongly that we will be able to pay for this position through additional programming because there's already current demand that we can't meet in terms of leagues for softball, pickleball, tennis, basketball, and then additional tournaments that our users are asking us for, but we don't have the capacity to put on, and those are particularly in volleyball and softball. So with that, I would answer any questions and invite Nick to step down too if you have any detailed questions you need to answer.
Sorry.
Why did I not just call it?
I just reserved my spot. Thanks, Mayor. Thanks, Una. Not a question about this specific position, I guess, but in regards to kind of bottlenecking our capacity, is a shortage of referees an issue for us at all to expand programming at all, or?
Mayor, Counselor, great question. The short answer is yes. We have struggled to hire enough officials in-house in order to execute our leagues. And so we did recently work with the Casper Rec League Association to do a professional services agreement whereby they could help supplement, primarily for tournaments. We really need to staff very large amounts of officials for large tournaments, and that's really challenging. But we wrote into the agreement that it would also be allowed that we supplement league play if that's necessary for the league to go. And so we are essentially paying contractors to come and help us out if the capacity demands.
Thank you. The reason I asked is it'd be a shame if we had an internal staff member expand programming, but then we're still getting capped because we don't have enough officials.
Sure, and I would add that the supervisor will be responsible to help recruit, and that's a big part of it, right? We want to get supervisors into schools, and Nick's already started great partnerships with the district and college, getting out to classrooms, encouraging kids at a young age to be interested in recreation as a whole, but including officiating throughout their high school years so that we can bolster those numbers later on.
Thank you.
I swear.
Just as a curiosity with the shortage of referees, because I know that at Visit Casper, they're always also calling for that. So with the sports ranch coming on, are we going to be teaming up with them just because we only have a very small pool of people? Is that how the city's gonna maybe work? I
Great
don't know.
question, Mayor, Vice Mayor. We've actually already been partnering with a number of agencies throughout the community, Visit Casper, Casper College, some of the other providers, YMCA, Boys and Girls Club, as well as members of the Sports Ranch. Groups have come together to also talk about this situation because it's concerning now, but once the ranch opens, we expect that it's going to be even greater concern. And so we've been working with the Wyoming High School Activities Association, WASHA. They are the ones that bring our state tournaments here to Casper and throughout the state. And so we were working with them to figure out, what programs they are using for finding officials and then sort of trying to partner with them and mimic it here locally so that we have a larger pool to draw from, whether you're Casper Recreation, the Sports Ranch, for state tournaments, for different things. There will hopefully be a pool of officials that can be contacted and just farmed out wherever they're needed. So that effort is already well underway.
Further questions? Thank you.
We could, Your Honor, maybe I could invite Mr. Brower up with his team to talk about the positions that he has at stake here. And then we'll have HR visit about the one position that they're requesting. Got a couple exciting developments in public operations, public services world. If we could give Tom the time to talk about that, that'd be great.
Mayor, councilors, thanks for the opportunity tonight. The first position I want to talk about is the equipment operator for the streets position. Over the last 10 years, streets has gone from 35 employees down to 18 employees, excuse me. So down to 18 employees. And a lot of that was through attrition, early retirement, and just them trying to figure out how to do more with less. And so when we had big snowstorms, they would call in anybody from parks, street, water, sewer to help them plow. Observed this year that we were spending roughly $400,000 on outsourcing street patching for water and sewer repairs, primarily water. Sewer doesn't necessarily fail catastrophically. When water fails, it leaves a big hole in the street. And we were outsourcing that to the tune of $400,000. And my thought was, these are very small asphalt patches. They're patching operations that require a lot of traffic control, a very timely response. And we thought, hey, we can handle this internally. And so our plan was to start this year with one position to give us the additional staffing to do that patching, that asphalt patching in-house. And the other benefit of that is it takes money from the enterprise account, the water account, and helps support the streets account, albeit with the water account paying less for the patches, because it doesn't cost as much for us to do that patching. And also, we are very sensitive to the free market capitalism. And for the most part, when I've talked to contractors, nobody's too upset for this, because a lot of people weren't too aggressive about bidding this work, because you didn't know when it was going to hit. So they could be in the middle of repaving 2nd Street or whatever big street, and all of a sudden, hey, you need to get a patch on Beverly Street. Well, that work fits perfectly for our streets. The other avenue that I discovered in looking through all the budgets was the fact that solid waste, one of the primary reasons we need to maintain alleys in good shape is in those areas where we have solid waste containers contained in those alleys. And so we figured out, hey, if we had another employee here, we could do a better job of maintaining those alleys. And again, then the sanitation fund can help support the streets department by maintaining better alleys. So without true negative budget impact, and actually positive to water and positive to streets, that we can get more work done and give them another employee. Any questions, Mayor, councilors, on the first position? Second one I'll address is the water treatment plant operator 1. The water treatment plant's 24/7, 365, nonstop. And as if you ever go visit water operators, it can be very mundane, staring at a computer screen and then followed by almost panic. Something goes wrong, and it's like, oh boy, I've got a pump that went out, or I have a tank that's incredibly low, or something's amiss. And again, it doesn't matter what time of day or night that is. And we struggle at the water treatment plant where we've got some older folks that are about ready to retire and quite a few younger people. And so we know we're going to be facing some people that are going to be retiring fairly soon. And we're trying to shore up our bench, if you will. And the other piece is with PTO and then people that are in the National Guard, when they take their time off for service, sometimes we have some real challenges staffing the water treatment plant. And with a product that virtually almost everybody in Casper consumes, the last thing we want to do is leave the water treatment plant unattended. And so we really, Bruce had been pushing for this position, and I strongly advocated for it, given the importance of the plant to all of our lives and the quality and the safety of that drinking water being a real primary concern. Any questions on the water treatment plant operator position?
This is one that will be billed back to the Joint Powers Water Board. Is that correct?
Mayor, that is correct.
Okay, so this doesn't have a positive or negative impact to our overall budget, so to speak.
Mayor, I would argue that there's a little impact because it will affect water rates for regional, slightly. So there is.
Okay.
It's watered down a little bit, pardon the pun, but it's watered down a little bit before it gets to us.
Very good. But I wanted to make sure that people understood that basically this will be charged out to, in essence, it will be charged out to everybody that buys water from the water treatment plant. So it won't totally be a true Casper only expense.
And that's exactly correct.
Okay, thank you. Next.
Mayor, I think there's real quick.
Oh,
Not a question.
I'm sorry.
I appreciate it. I just wanted to make sure folks were aware, we do get Central Wyoming Regional Water minutes in our packets. And so I've seen this talked about for several months, and it provides a lot of context. So for folks that want to learn more, we make that information publicly available as well.
Mr. City Manager, did you want me to talk about the wastewater operations?
Please, yeah.
Mayor, councilors, this is a position I've been advocating for early on, and my hat off to Bruce for helping me with this issue. Historically, we've had one person that's over all of water and wastewater. So that's water distribution, water treatment, wastewater collection, wastewater treatment, and stormwater. And that is a very broad category. And it's a whole lot of work for one person to cover. With my emphasis and my push on aging infrastructure and our deferred capital improvements, I really was advocating that we need to have, it's too much work for one person. We really need to split this up. And so we're going to have a water operations officer that Bruce is going to take over. So he'll be over water distribution in the water treatment plant. And as the mayor can attest, and anybody that reads the minutes, you know, we have a dozen very significant capital improvement projects that are slated at the water treatment plant. And then we'll have this new wastewater operations officer. That'll be basically the wastewater Bruce, which will be a position that will open up for advertise. And again, it's the emphasis on the capital improvement plans and the projects that we need to do, and also a whole lot of help with funding these improvements. Really figured out what the needed capital improvements we needed, especially on the wastewater side. I need some help in just ferreting out all the funding sources we can possibly get. And there's a lot of federal funding out there. It comes with a lot of different strengths and some challenges. But again, with the capital needs that we have in the wastewater side, really need to aggressively attack that.
Questions about the wastewater? Now, will the guy over the wastewater also take over then the stormwater?
Mayor, that is correct. The person we put in the wastewater operations officer will be over stormwater as well as the wastewater.
So that may wind up giving us a little more emphasis on stormwater as well.
There, absolutely.
Very good. Thought I'd put that plug in for stormwater.
Earl, I appreciate any help you can give me.
We're trying. Thank you.
Heavy lift, but I appreciate it.
And I'm getting weaker by the day. Thank you, Tom.
I too am struggling with the bad throat, so I thought I would share the lozenges. I've got one left if you need that.
Mayor, counselors, thank you for this opportunity to talk about this new position. So the Employee Engagement and Development Specialist is a position that I'm going to have Nicole Carlson, our HR manager, talk more about with you. But I wanted to bring her up and introduce her twofold. Number one, because she's partly to blame on why we need this additional position. So about a year ago, we started a class for our leadership. It's called 100 Points of Leadership. Because we have over 100, but for sake of a nice round number, 100 points of leadership to make or break with our employees, our leaders in our organization. That's how many formal, a little bit more than 100. So Nicole has pretty much single-handedly developed this training and run this program once a month for almost a year. And it has been by far the most successful that I've seen in the past 20 years to engage our leaders and have them really understand basic things that are needed. So because of that success, I wanted to give her kudos for that and let her talk more about the position on why it's needed. Give her that leadership opportunity to talk to you. So thank you.
Mayor, Council. So as Tracy said, about a year ago, we started a formal leadership program for our 100 Points of Leadership. Each month, our leaders attend trainings, and it focuses on a variety of topics like creating psychological safety, problem solving, collaboration, teamwork, giving feedback to their employees, and also engaging in difficult conversations or difficult situations. So we requested a new position to maintain the momentum that we've seen. We've seen a lot of positivity with our leaders and with our employees with this program, so we want to keep that going. The new position will focus not only on employee engagement and development, but also internal communication. There's a lot of opportunities for improvement as far as communicating with our staff about what's going on. And HR believes that focusing on a culture of learning and support will contribute to the overall success of the organization as well as the satisfaction of our employees. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Nicole. Thanks, Tracy. I was curious how somebody gets enrolled in this program. And I guess let's start there.
Sure.
How does it start taking advantage?
So formal leaders are required to attend. So like Tracy said, we have about 100 and everyone has to attend each month. We've also been able to offer some of our classes to general staff. And so we've had about 80 to 100 employees attend the classes that we've offered to general staff as well. And it's voluntary for general staff.
Councilor Pollak.
The same question.
Oh, okay. Anybody else, any other questions? So this is almost like a contemporary supervision type of a class, so to speak.
Little leadership academy each month. Leadership academy each month.
Okay. Very good. No other questions? Thank you. Oh,
Do you expect it to be in a full-time position? Is there enough to do to be on the ground all the time?
Yeah.
Along with the leadership development, we really want to do better at communicating with employees in general. So on all of our exit interviews that we conduct, the number one thing, or I don't know if it's number one, but communication is always listed on there. And one of the council goals, is communication with citizenry. And we want to take that in-house and really emphasize that we have all of these employees that we need to connect with. So that's why there's plenty for a full-time position, we believe.
thank you. Anything else from anybody? I think that pretty well covers it. Thank you both, Tracy and Nicole.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, councilors. Just to be clear, the budget numbers that you see, including what you saw in the general fund and worksheet and so forth that we went over, does include these positions, but certainly could be amended to remove the positions if council would see fit. And obviously that's your authority to direct. Just to give you a real quick insight into what we expect here coming in the near future. While we there we go, thank you. You know that we are approaching the federal government to try to help us with these positions in the fire department. And hopefully by this time next year, we will have a lot of success to report as it relates to that funding and the opportunity to bring on these folks. Mr. Brower and Mr. Rogers have identified that an equipment operator in like fashion will need to be considered this time next year as well. And we'll see how all that works out. I know that we are at the 6 o'clock hour, and indeed we do have dinner here. Certainly we could continue to talk about what we're recommending by way of salaries and benefits, or we can use this opportunity to take that break and grab dinner. Whatever you would prefer is what we're happy to do.
Had a question?
Yeah, can I ask a question about positions before we do either of those two things?
Oh.
My question is, it sounds like this is the pared down list, the 10 that we saw up there, from a larger list of needs that were identified. Is there any possibility of us getting any visibility into some of the other, maybe less critical needs that were left on the cutting room floor during the process? Just so that, we have some sense also of the things that we're not able to fund at this moment, but are also needs that have been identified within the organization.
Sure. Yes, absolutely.
And to piggyback off of what Amber was saying, I was just curious of how out of all of that list of additional personnel, how the 10 were chosen versus the rest.
Mr. Mayor, Councilor, Madam Vice Mayor, the fact is that the process that we undertake to evaluate positions is one that we take very seriously. Because we don't want to come forward to all of you and request what many would view as growing government without having some real serious need at stake, or some critical stopgap that we're not meeting that would help us achieve your goals, or a service critical element that we're just simply falling short on. In a lot of cases, what we try to determine is whether or not these positions that we request can be funded in alternative ways, or if in fact they may give us an opportunity to generate more revenue, which is the case sometimes. I think Selima's position is one that might be indicative of that this time around. But to answer your question more specifically, we start the process of evaluating positions in the late fall of the end of the calendar year. So for us in this fiscal year discussion, that means back in November and December, we start getting submissions for staffing requests. Those submissions initially come to a committee that we have put together that consists primarily of Tracy's team and members of Jill's team and others who evaluate the requests that come forward on the basis of how critical the needs might be, and some of the other stopping points that I just mentioned. Does it bring revenue to the table? Are these council goal intensive positions? Is there a service need that we're dropping the ball on that we can't keep up with, et cetera, et cetera. We've recently incorporated Ethan's help in terms of evaluating safety issues that may be going unaddressed because of a lack of staffing and a lack of help. The department heads come into that committee towards the beginning of the year and make their pitch, if you will, to the members of that committee. The members of that committee put together a list, and they come and see me with that list. And that list was north of 10 people. You know, I can't remember exactly how many were on there, but, and then the committee talks to me as to some of the justifications that they used to bring that group of employees or list of positions to myself. Typically, I will have additional questions and need additional information. Sometimes that includes having members of the committee come back to me with another memo. And in fact, we've had, I don't know, 6 memos. And this iteration, this go around was short in terms of the amount of memos that Tracy and her team had to produce. Sometimes that includes me sitting down with the respective department head to try to dig into some of the requests a little further. To get us to the point where we feel good about a list of 10 votes that ultimately we share with the executive team to say, hey, we boiled it down. Here's what we think we're going to go to the council with, and go from there. You bet. You bet.
Any other questions on the personnel? Let's go ahead and take our dinner break.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Then we can come back and talk about wages.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody.
You bet. Is it in?
How long are we thinking?
Yeah.
Fake out.
I guess we're here whenever you're ready, Mr. City Manager.
All right. Thank you.
Get Wyatt.
Mr. Mayor, councilors, generally what we do is we like to walk you through what it is that we would suggest by way of benefit and wage proposals for the new fiscal year. I would tell you that we are not trying to push the envelope, as it were, but also we don't want to lose pace with respect to being fair with our employees and helping them be competitive, and certainly as much as possible try to help our employees keep some pace with respect to the rising costs of living right now. So with that, if I could just kind of give you a few of the details, and then we can walk through whatever questions you might have or changes you want to see. You probably recognize the spreadsheet that you have in front of you. This is the interactive sheet, the iterations of which we've used in the past budgeting processes, where we try to capture costs for you, so you can see the cost of each benefit that we are trying to propose and put forward for your consideration. To cut to the chase of it, if I could, Mr. Mayor, we are essentially recommending a wage increase for the general government employees of 3%, which is highlighted there in the yellow. Whereas Pete has the ordered, yeah, right there, thank you. Which, as you can tell, for the citywide anticipated costs is right over $613,000. And for the general fund in particular, would be $263,000. And that would just be for the, the regular non-public safety employees. For public safety, we are recommending your standard step, which for many who are, have that room in their wage band, will mean roughly 5% for those individuals to take that step in their wage band. And that's really what we're talking about. We're talking about trying to advance our employees through their respective wage bands. We are not proposing any COLAs this year. We are appreciative of what council has done for staff of late. And at this point in time, we're really just recommending that the wage band increases in the opportunity to advance is most important right now. There are a couple other things, however, that we're also suggesting, albeit those are the big ones that we typically get questions about. As sort of a new implement this year, we are proposing that for employees who don't get their full 3%, if you will, they will be able to receive a one-time payment that would essentially make up the difference. The reason an employee wouldn't get that, for example, would be if in fact they are at the top of their wage band, they just don't have 3% growth left in their wage band to receive. And so what we're suggesting is that we would make that up in the form of a one-time payment. Can you highlight where that cost is? Certainly the one-time payment. Yep. Yep, there it is. So that means for the entire city, that would be, let's say, 223,000. Thank you. And for the general fund, we're talking just at 104 to provide that accommodation. We are also suggesting that for PD sworn, the city take on more of the employee contribution as the employer, which means that the extent by which the employer, which means all of you, would be providing contributions to the state retirement system would increase by that 3.9% that you see on the screen that Pete has captured. That would mean the $329,000 to take on that additional piece of the employees' contribution to the police retirement fund. That is, of course, hosted by the state. Council is aware that there are a number of costs with the CBA that we are incurring. However, if you wanted to see what the steps costs were for the firefighters, we would be that 5% right there. And then of course the costs that cascade from there, which looks like to me 345, if I'm reading that correctly. One of the other things that we are suggesting be done during the next fiscal year although will start in earnest as soon as the fiscal year clock changes, is that of updating the compensation schedule for employees. Believe it or not, it's been 3 or 4 years since we've undertaken the study and actually implemented the results, which you'll recall we did in phases when we went through this the last time. We're suggesting that this summer we take on that initiative again, albeit in a abbreviated format, not as intense as when we went through this the last time, and see what the market is suggesting about our staff positions and how competitive or not competitive the wages that we have currently are. We expect that will cost somewhere in the neighborhood of, we think, less than $50,000 to do. And the budget accommodates some $500,000 for costs of implementation, assuming that those costs can be incurred at the beginning of the new year. So for the second half of the fiscal year, if you will. All of that is built into the budget and ready to go if council is supportive of what we're recommending. If you want to see different alternatives and different implications with respect to different factors that you'd want to plug into this spreadsheet, we're prepared to walk through that with you tonight as well. And so I'd certainly open up, Mr. Mayor, for any questions that there may be at this point.
Councilor Sutherland.
Thank you. Just in terms of the updated study there is, I don't know what best practice would be in terms of understanding kind of your market competition. So I guess I have a curiosity about that. And then I guess it's connected to that. Like, is that because we've kind of gone through this tumultuous period of time and we want to make sure that we're on par with our peers, or is it best practice to do it every so often?
Your Honor, Counselor, thank you for the question. I would say all apply, the factors you just identified. We are concerned about keeping and retaining employees. We are concerned about the time frame by which, we went through this the last time. And industry would say, every 4 to 5 years, we should probably go through it again, or at least update what we have. And so there are certainly particular work areas that seem to be more aggressive in terms of, attracting employees away from us. And so there, without a doubt, that feeds into this desire to want to go through this again here as soon as we can.
I would think that probably it's a good idea too, because the market hasn't been, our cost of living hasn't been all that constant the way it had been for several years in the past. We have been going through the last 3 or 4 years of some very rapid inflation, which has probably screwed the market as well.
I think that's fair.
Questions, comments? I think we're pretty well.
Mr. Mayor,
Oh, I'm sorry. Go for it, Michael.
thank you. Carter, can you just remind me when we did the last market study? You may have said that, but I missed it.
No problem, Your Honor, if I may, Counselor. We actually collected the data with respect to our market communities. I want to say that activity took place in 19, and then we started the implementation in 21.
Okay, so basically the market data is 5 years old.
I think that's right,
Okay.
Counselor.
So,
Yep.
okay, so yeah, it would make sense to do another market study and update that information, so. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Michael, just make sure you holler at us because we are looking at other screens and stuff, so definitely
sure
not a
will.
problem.
We've got a
Okay,
lot going on there.
Very good. Any other questions? Let's go on to the next topic.
All right, very good. Thank you. One of the things that I think was kind of a high watermark for the current fiscal year and certainly the current calendar year is with regard to the success that we've had with respect to grants. Council has been a big supporter of us looking for those opportunities as much as we can. And with each of those opportunities, we've tried to come to council to be sure that we weren't getting ahead of you in terms of the match dollars that we would need in some cases, the support that we would need from all of you in the form of actually visiting with grantors and being present in some of those meetings and presentations and so forth. And I'm happy to say that that has produced results for us substantially. I don't know if you recall the information I shared with you a few months back, wherein in calendar year 23 alone, staff was successful in garnering somewhere between 11 and $12 million in unanticipated money that enabled us to do projects that we would have no capacity to do otherwise. And those benefits are coming forward now. We're seeing work take place, for example, over at Washington Park, getting underway as one example. We're going to be moving forward on some river work here soon as another example. And many of you came to Washington last week to try to help us take the cause directly to the decision makers in DC as it pertains to funding that we're looking for, primarily on the public safety front, which would be tremendous to receive. Now, without a doubt, pursuant to that effort and our heightened concern with regard to supplementing what we have available to ourselves with grant funding, there certainly has been this question that indeed, when you receive federal money, you receive unwanted commitments and other requirements that some deem as being strings that we have no way around, and so on. And so I wanted to address that just a little bit, if I could. One thing that we need to be clear of is, without a doubt, well, that was not what I want to do. I don't know what button that. Why would you equip me with that button? Don't know. Well, you press the button from now on. You ain't parents are not doing it. Took us out of there altogether. So while Pete gets us loaded back up, and my apologies for causing that interruption, I wanted to address the idea of strings attached to federal funds, because I don't want council to take on the perception that by getting federal money, we inherit a bunch of problems. I would tell you that when you go for federal grants, it is true that there is reporting, that there is expectations, that there are expectations, and that indeed the follow-up is such that we have to prove on somewhat of a vigorous basis that we did what we said we would do with those dollars that we were granted. And frankly, we should have to say and report how it is that we use those dollars, whether it's the federal agencies that are granting those dollars, whether it's state agencies that are granting those dollars, or it's some sort of private fund that we've been able to gain access to. They too have similar reporting that suggests we need to be vigorous and transparent and thorough in terms of our reporting with regard to how we spent those dollars. And so from that standpoint, I would tell you, we don't mind that accountability. We understand that that accountability is necessary and important, and would suggest even further that in so doing, we would still suggest that getting supplemental dollars, regardless from what agency and program, is still really, really critical in order to accomplish the things that you and your public want to see happen. I would also say that in many cases, as I've already mentioned, some of these dollars that we obtain are dollars that, were they not available, we simply wouldn't have any other option in terms of getting some of these needful projects done. The other thing, though, that I want you to be real clear of too is we've been in the business of getting federal dollars for quite some time now. We've been in the transit business since the 80s. Some of you recall when we got into that business. And without a doubt, ever since that time, we have engaged the funds and resources of the federal government in order to make that happen. Many of you are aware that our services that are provided through victim services and whatnot are made possible because of programs like you see on the screen here, which are federal programs. And I'm convinced that if we didn't have those programs available to us, we would not be able to make those services available to the extent that we do today. So the city has a long history, and those are just a couple of examples, by the way, has a long history of receiving federal dollars and putting federal dollars to work in productive and useful ways for our community. To the extent that if we were to get rid of those services because of some stigma associated with receiving federal dollars, not only would we not be able to provide those services, but I believe your community would be very upset if those services were to go away. I recall with some fondness the conversation that we had about the transit system when we were simply wanting to talk about ways in which to save money with the transit system back in 2018. Council will recall, particularly those who were on the board at that time, the fury that came as a result of simply wanting to address cost containment measures, not eliminating services, mind you. So that leads me to believe that some of these highly used services that are supported by federal dollars are also treasured by our community and appreciated. So my request would be this. When it comes to what it is that we have on the docket for next year, if you could switch for me. This $11.6 million that we anticipate implementing into various projects and services that we are anticipating for the next year, you will note that a lot of those dollars are indeed federal dollars. And a great portion of the dollars are state dollars as well. From our standpoint, we need those dollars to do the things that we have in mind here. And I would also suggest that we want to be more aggressive in getting supplemental dollars as well, which means dollars from the state. It means dollars from the feds and every other program that we think we can reasonably access without creating problems that some programs may have inherently. As you are aware, some of the programs that we have in mind that we've already been awarded include federal dollars through the Community Projects Fund for the North Platte Interceptor project, which, as you know, is a huge project. The $1.8 million that we're getting through the Community Projects program will go a long way in terms of completing the next phase for the Interceptor project. We've also been granted $700,000 through LWCF, Land Water Conservation Fund, that enables us to move forward with the second phase of Washington Park and put together a lot of the amenities that we're targeting for that, that further redevelopment, if you will, of that wonderful community asset. We also have been blessed to receive $4.1 million from the state of Wyoming for some sewer work that will take our sewer infrastructure north of the event center, generally speaking, so that we can hopefully stimulate some needful development in that area as well and continue the energy that is being brought on by the private sector, excuse me. So my request would be, let's hang in there. Let's keep pursuing those dollars. Let's keep pushing for that supplemental revenue, if you will, so that we can accomplish some needful projects. Because the fact is, we've got way more projects that need to be done. And I emphasize the word need, that we likely will never find enough money for. So I'm hoping that council will hang in there and not cut our wings, as it were, with regard to the strides we're making in this arena. Any questions that we can entertain about grants? Okay.
Only comment I would make is that basically we all pay income taxes to the feds and they dole it out. If we don't get some of it back, our money's just going to somebody else. So we need to be in that pool because it appears they're going to continue to give it away. And so I guess we feel like we need to be in the pool swimming with the sharks.
Yes, indeed. Just to report on the trip that we had last week in Washington, for those of you who weren't able to go or haven't received a report lately. I thought the conversations were very fruitful and productive. I thought they were encouraging. If indeed the dollars do come through that we are trying to pursue, those dollars will be transformational, not only for the fire department, as we just mentioned, but also for things that the police department's trying to do as well, and bring great benefit to what it is that we need to have done. And certainly the dollars at home that are made available through direct distribution, sales tax revenue, and 1 cent just aren't enough in order to accomplish the heavy lift of dealing with our current building inventory, our streets inventory that is lagging, and so on and so on. I think that would be a good opportunity to segue into capital, if I could, because as you all know, capital is a big target with regard to grant dollars that we're trying to pursue, with respect to 1 cent dollars that you have allocated very scrupulously for the last couple years. And in some cases, even direct out distribution in the opportunity fund.
Mr. Mayor? Steve?
Yes, Michael.
Hi, Carter, before we move on to capital, I just want to say thank you for that.
We lost you,
It's
Michael.
largely, pardon me?
We lost you there for a minute.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I've raised this question in the past before, and that's largely come from constituents, but I just want to say thank you for sharing that information about kind of our approach to using federal dollars and kind of clarifying some of the things that might be perceptions of strings being attached. And again, I am wholeheartedly supportive and in favor of our continued involvement in federal funding, and I know the benefits that it brings to the city and to the citizens of Casper. So again, thank you for that information. I think, again, not to belabor that, but to just kind of remind us that with this information, I think we'll be able in a position as council to respond to concerns when they come, when they arise from constituents. And I think that's always helpful. And you know, the concerns I've heard are not so much about the data or the reporting or the accountability aspect, but more along the lines of And you kind of touched on this, Carter, about signing off on or agreeing to other federal initiatives that may have nothing to do with the grant itself. But again, the public perception sometimes is that, you know, that we're agreeing to or signing off on other federal initiatives. And the most recent example that kind of comes to mind was our discussion about, and it was in the transportation discussion about electric vehicles. And that the initiative, the push from the federal government is to move to, you know, zero emissions and electric vehicles, which, you know, we discovered pretty quickly that's not very practical in Wyoming. So again, thank you for the information, and we wholeheartedly, I at least wholeheartedly support your efforts to continue to pursue federal funds.
Thank you, sir.
Any other questions? Councilor Gamroth?
Thanks, Mayor. I concur with Councilor Bond. Is it fair to say, Carter, that this presentation will end up in our information packet next week, or we'll have access to it? Is that, I'd love to be able to refer to it.
Sure, absolutely. Mr. Mayor, Councilor, at the very, very least, we can get the link out to you so that you can have access to it electronically and available to you. So count on it.
Thank you.
As I mentioned, capital, Mr. Mayor, is a huge target with regard to grant funding that we pursue. You know, the river project is just a prime example of that. Council's gonna need to be really gearing up to consider grants for wastewater treatment plant and in partnership with Regional Water, the water treatment plant. We've just got a whole host of things that we really need to focus on and hopefully obtain resources outside of what we have available to us currently to make happen. One of the largest things that I like to be sure people are aware of with respect to capital is that indeed pursuant to council's direction a few years ago, which I really, really appreciate, we do not pursue capital initiatives without the cash on hand to do it. And so we purposely collect 1 cent money a year ahead of time so that we have that on hand. And when we come to you with a budget, that budget is for the dollars that we've collected through the 1 cent program. The same with, you know, opportunity funds, if we ever bring those forward for you to consider. The same with leveraging dollars that we have on hand to pursue grants. 9 times out of 10, we're not going to come forward if we don't have those dollars on hand. Now, without a doubt, you know, there may be times where we need to come to you in limited scenarios for loan dollars, particularly when you're talking about big heavy lifts like a wastewater treatment plant or a water treatment plant, and those kinds of things. Yes, that may require some loan dollars. When we come to you with grants and so forth in mind, we don't budget those projects that those grants are intended for until we know we received those grants or have received reward of those grants and that kind of thing. So in every way that we possibly can, we balance our ability to do capital based on the means that we have available to do so. One of the biggest questions that we generally get is that of how in fact we're using 1 cent in those endeavors. The current myth, if you will, about 1 cent dollars that I've heard lately, not a whole lot, but certainly we do get questioned from time to time, is that, well, now that 1 cent is permanent, you know, there's really no need to consider other revenues or avenues for capital money. And the fact is, 1 cent is not permanent. The optional 1 cent program is still very much an optional program. It is true that we did, the city of Casper, the city of Casper City Council did approve the idea of considering ways in which 1 cent could be made permanent. That initiative did not pass. And so therefore, 1 cent is still very much an option that voters get to consider every 4 years here in Natrona County. And in 2.5 years, roughly, voters in Sherman County will get to consider that again as to whether or not it should be renewed for another 4 years. So without a doubt, I want you to know that we take the commitment that you made with respect to the resolution that you passed on behalf of 1 cent very seriously. And I would say that we are trying to follow that resolution scripture and verse as closely as we possibly can. We meet about it often, we talk about it, and we want to be sure that we don't violate that contract that resolution serves as with the community pertaining to how 1 cent should be used and spent in Casper. We can't speak for other entities in the Sherman County, but we can certainly say that for the city of Casper, we are following that resolution very closely. And as a matter of fact, just to kind of give you a feel for what that looks like, this is how we're anticipating it for FY25. Capital will be doled out over the next year, and across which departments and project areas. You will see that the total capital spend that we are proposing is in the neighborhood of $46 million. That is less than last year, albeit not by much, particularly when you consider the amendments that we had throughout the year that punched that number up some. We have spent quite a bit of time over the last few months talking about capital. In fact, in the March timeframe, we brought forward a fairly significant memo and packet and so on that detailed the ways in which we'd like to go with regard to capital, the ways in which our master plans are directing us, and et cetera. And you gave us provisional approval for what you see on the screen. Some of the larger projects that we hope to tackle pursuant to that provisional approval. Wolf Creek improvements, that second phase is a big one that we hope to get done. The 10 million gallon water tank replacement is another big one, which will be about $10 or $12 million to do, and be very contingent upon a big grant to make that happen. We've already talked about the Interceptor project. We've also already talked about the North Platte Park Sewer project. We hope to move forward in earnest with regard to the police headquarters and those federal dollars that you've already set aside to make that happen. And actually, as a function of this fiscal year, we're really hoping to procure 10 police cars. The police chief talked to you about that, among a number of other things throughout that $46 million agenda that we have on your in your book. Any questions about capital, Mr. Mayor?
Questions from anybody? John?
I do. Sorry, I think this is gonna just show that I need to do math, but the 20 million for the headquarters is not included in this 45? So that's not considered, sorry, can you just clarify?
I can, no problem.
Yeah,
no problem.
thank you.
The $20 million was originally budgeted in last year's fiscal year capital budget.
Mhm.
And now that we are nearing the end of design, we will be ready to deploy those dollars in a construction mode.
Okay.
And so you will see us needing to roll over a lot of those dollars to tackle that project in earnest. I'm hoping starting this fall.
Okay, got it. So it's not part of this because it's already been
Correct.
budgeted.
Right.
Thank you.
Yep.
That will be rolled over what the final, is it the final budget amendment for this year? Or is it the number one for next year when that all gets rolled over?
I'm wondering. We're thinking the first amendment of the new fiscal year, which
Okay,
generally you'd see in around the August timeframe.
and that's normally the big one because of these types of rollovers.
Yep,
So
exactly.
yeah, so basically it will be at least $20 million.
It'll will be big.
Yes, but I wanted to make sure that everybody on council understood part of that as well, since you had brought it up there.
Just to be clear, here's the source funding, if you will, for a lot of this capital. Much of which, shouldn't be a whole lot of surprise to you. In that we've talked a lot about the grants that you see listed here and the detail for 1 cent. And so with that, Mr. Mayor, if there are any other questions about capital, our department heads are here tonight and their teammates. We can go into any kind of detail that you'd like tonight, probably.
Thank you, Mayor.
Councilor Gamroth.
Thanks, Carter. The previous slide, I think, showed that, capital, so streets, it looks like we were allocating, just over 5 million. I know in the previous, in the current one cycle we're in now, we had allocated 21.8 million for streets over the 4-year cycle, which ended up being about 5.5 million. So I was just curious. That figure was lower than I was expecting, I guess. So do you mind providing a little more context to that?
Mr. Mayor and Councilor, thank you for that question and appreciate your attention to that detail. By the time we get done through the 4 years of 1 cent 17 collections, we will either have met or we will be scheduled to meet the full breadth of that $21 million, whatever that final number ends up being. My hope is that not only will we have that met, but that we'll be able to bring some other 1 cent dollars forward. If history is at all a teacher of how this can go, to consider other projects that 1 cent may be able to tackle. So yes, you may see from year to year some variation with regard to what that number can look like. I would say that that's more of a function of which projects we can queue up appropriately in that year, and what we think we will actually generate in the overall receipt picture from 1 cent in that particular time frame. So I wouldn't get too alarmed that number doesn't look exactly like what you might think it should, because there's a lot of factors that play into that. But I'm telling you, by the end of the 4 years, we're gonna spend every one of those 1 cent dollars.
I appreciate it. Follow up if I could. I appreciate that context. I don't believe a lot of members were on council at the time that we went over the streets assessment study and did the 1 cent allocations. At that time, the assessment determined that we needed $7 million to maintain road conditions, and Andrew Beamer, our public works director at the time, gave us a very conservative amount that the 5.5 should do it. I'm worried that considering the inflation we've experienced since we made that decision, that we're still going to be behind the ball. And so I may not, I appreciate that we may be able to spend unencumbered 1 cent dollars at some point in the future. I may or may not be on council. And so I would just strongly advocate to this group, whoever might be left at that point, that I feel strongly that if we have an excess of 1 cent funding, we should be more ambitious with our streets projects. I'll advocate for it again if I'm up here. Otherwise, I'll come speak to y'all at the podium. But yeah, I just want us to be really ambitious with streets, because every time we do our 1 cent surveys, it is by and large the #1 priority of our residents. I was disappointed with the results of the streets assessment study that was done back in like 2019. And so I really, really want to do what we can to improve that score, but I appreciate the context. Thank you.
No problem. Mr. Mayor, if I may add to, and maybe this will bring some comfort to Councilor Gamroth, I hope so. We do have other funds that we are slowly collecting one-time revenue into. And I think with any luck, some of those funds will be able to contribute to other capital projects that we all have our eye on. Streets, not the least of which we're all concerned about as well. So, there may be a point in time where 1 cent won't be the only source funding for streets, and I hope to be able to bring that good news to you sooner than later.
Thank you.
You had something?
I'd already said it. They said we can go first. I can go.
Oh, sorry. Just you two. That,
Oh, whenever you get a chance.
oh, okay.
If you leave, so first.
Yeah, go for it. Just out of curiosity, if, say we had the 7 million to put towards streets every single year, how many more people would we need to hire to make that happen?
Mr. Mayor, Madam Vice Mayor, that is a fantastic question. I would say that indeed, the engineering staff would feel that probably most acutely in terms of them being our managers, if you will, of those projects and our representatives out on the street, out in the field. And so for me, it would be easy to say that to take on an endeavor of nearly half, 50% growth in that world, we would at least need another engineer. Let me say one more reassuring thing to tag onto your question, if I could. I really appreciate the work that Tom and Shad are doing in terms of some of the work that they are trying to undertake to extend some of their maintenance and repair situations in such a way that we're leveraging work a little more aggressively than we have been in the past. So materials costs that you'll see in the budget and so on are going up, albeit not as aggressively as Shad would love to see. And that too is what I would call a source fund for streets work. Now, granted, we don't undertake major reconstruction through Shad's teams and so on, because we do think that that would be a mix, if you will, of private work versus what we can do in-house that perhaps would be unacceptable to the council. But nonetheless, we are trying to leverage what we can do as much as possible to get on top of this huge gorilla that streets always proves to be.
And just a quick follow-up, historically, have we ever spent the 7 million on streets in a year? Best year, 2014. Right, let's-
Yeah, I don't know what you think.
West Avenue?
Yeah, well, there certainly have been, Mr. Mayor, Madam Vice Mayor, there certainly have been significant singular projects that we've tried to do that may have put us close to that. Not because, mostly because we've been able to get grant funding that have enabled us to take on a larger project. And Midwest is definitely a good example of that. The third phase of which we're starting right now. But outside of a project specific endeavor, probably not. Probably not.
Thank you.
Mine was related, I guess. I mean, Tom was telling us how, what it was 35 down to 18 in your department. And so I just had kind of a question about, it may be too theoretical, just like how do we match capacity to do projects with that, which is budgeted. But I think Lisa's question essentially got us there, and sounds like we'll need a little bit more human capacity if we're gonna also increase budgetarily significantly. So is my takeaway accurate?
Well, Mr. Mayor, Counselor, you make a good point, and I would say the impact that you're probably reaching out for is probably way more along the lines of what we would spend in material each year that would enhance the need for more folks in Shad's teams. Because indeed, the more material that we have available in the general fund, for example, the more work Shad and his team are gonna wanna do. And eventually that's gonna require more people from the maintenance and repair standpoint, which all results in more street surface that we can rely on more favorably, right? But it's just a different avenue.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
You bet.
So check, mine's just a comment. I think when we talk about, I agree with Kyle that to put more focus in on street projects, but I think the reality of the situation is that you got to rob Peter to pay Paul. And we have to make some hard decisions if we want to do that, i.e. cutting nonprofit money. We talked about that. I'm not suggesting that. But these are hard decisions that have to be made. And if the council wants to be bold and brave, then they're going to have to make some tough decisions. Whether or not I would agree with that is another thing. But I'm saying if you want to get to that point, then you're going to have to pull your pants up tight and make the decision. If you want to get to that point with the streets. Now, the public may not like it when you start making tough decisions on it. But if you're trying to do that, this takes a lot of guts and be bold to make that decision. If you want to improve the streets, that's the reality of the situation. There's no way around that.
Mr. Mayor, and maybe one thing that we could consider is updating that particular study. Because now that 2018, I think, is when we actually received that data. A lot has changed since that time, not the least of which is the cost to build a street mile in Casper, Wyoming. Maybe it makes sense to consider what it would take to update that study and see where we're at, Like most studies, when it comes to updating, it's not near the cost that we initially incur, but it might be worth the investment to see where we're at and see what kind of tough decisions may be on our near horizon.
No, my one concern about that is it's not going to get any cheaper. And by us not having spent the 7 million, as Councillor Gamroff mentioned, I'm not sure we want to see that updated report. We may be further down the list is my concern to a point. But anyhow, that may not be a bad idea. So I guess as part of the work session, are we interested in trying to update that study?
I'd be curious what the cost is, but to your point, if we can't even get to the 7, which was kind of their base at the initial study, they're gonna come back, tell us we need 9, and we're gonna be like, okay, well.
Yeah, maybe we'll get to 7. So, yeah, that's kind of where I was, Kyle. So, very good. Kyle, you were next on my list.
I don't think I have.
Oh, okay, because I had you written down. So, okay, sorry about that. Amber?
Thanks. Because streets keep Kyle up at night, I should probably mention, the thing that keeps me up at night is deferred building and other systems maintenance. I feel like we were able to get some clarity from Andrew about what is a reasonable target for street spending to sort of maintain where we're at now. I don't feel like I've ever sort of gotten that, what's a round good building target number that we should be spending every year. I'm gonna guess it's not 1.3. If we were gonna start to, really try to think about, I don't think we have in buildings, we don't have the advantage of a neat and tidy grade like we got for streets, but I would expect it would be similar scenario to streets or worse. So just wondering if you have if our streets target should be 7 and we're spending 5, what's our comparable building maintenance target?
Counselor, thank you for that question, Mr. Mayor, if you don't mind.
Oh, absolutely.
While I would agree that having that grade for streets, while discouraging, it's been a fact that we've been able to use to be communicative as it relates to what our problem is and what the degree and severity of the issues that we have with streets. I would say though that I feel like we made some progress as it relates to the facility study that we did probably in 20 or thereabouts, wherein it gave us a recommendation as to what we should spend per building system, like heat and HVAC and plumbing and those kinds of things with regard to each year. And it went even further to say what our cost would look like if we deferred that maintenance too far down the road and what the escalator could be and so on and so on. So, in some ways we've tried to answer that question. In some ways we probably still have some more work to do. But with respect to 1 cent, we use that study a lot to try to lay out the menu that we thought council could adopt in the ways in which we used, or I should say, we allocated 1 cent across the next 4 years. I think though, to answer your question more thoroughly, we may want to sit down in a work session format and kind of get an update with regard to where we're at and how that's going, and perhaps the gaps that we're still seeing in terms of funding for systems that we may still be hunting. You saw some of that actually not too long ago when we were talking about the Fort Wyoming Center. We got a little bit of a taste of what that could look like with some of our, with that building, and what you may expect to see with some of our other facilities. So if it pleases the council, maybe that's not a bad idea to undertake this summer. That's a good idea.
Any other questions or comments? Continue on.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, councilors. Wonderful question. I really appreciate it. We should talk about the enterprise funds. This is another section of the budget that council spends quite a bit of time on throughout the year. You know that you have rate settings at the end of the year, at the end of the calendar year, to be ready for the new calendar year. And we take a lot of that detail and information, and we build our budgets around that direction, that formal direction. Let me show you where we are right now and what your budget proposes with respect to the enterprises. Water by far, water distribution specifically is the golden child with regard to performance and how it's doing and some of the wonderful things that are happening there. This dashed line, you can see what it is that we represented to you, back in, I'm going to say November, December timeframe, when we suggested what rates need to be done. And as a result, what we think the performance of the fund would be with that support. Fast forward to now and where we're at now versus, with the benefit of having some actuals under our belt and some history and so on since that time, I would say the water fund is doing great and better than expected, which is primarily the result of not spending as much as we thought we'd have to. You know that in water distribution, one of the biggest expenses that we have, aside from capital and those kinds of things, is what we pay regional water to buy water. That can be as much as $8 million. And in fact, I think that's what we've got budgeted coming up for this fiscal year, if I remember correctly. As we move forward, however, I wanted to show you something. If you look at that mustard colored line, you can see what happens to our performance if in fact we maintain the same capital agenda, but we do it without 1% benefiting this fund. Council is aware that the water fund is one of the funds that has the benefit of infusions of 1 cent dollars. You can see that mustard colored line drops much more precipitously than we would expect. And I would suggest the way that council would want to correct that probably is by doing less from a capital standpoint. And that, of course, would help that mustard line come more in concert with what you might see as a more favorable trajectory. When you look at this on a more granular basis, like we did for the general fund just a few minutes earlier. The news is good with the water fund. If you look at the first yellow number, or the number that's highlighted in yellow, thank you, Pete. 7.9 is what council can expect to start in the water fund at the beginning of this fiscal year. That 7.9 is over and above any of your restricted accounts, your reserve accounts. All of your policy-driven mandated balance of funding that you asked to be maintained, that 7.9 will still be there to I call it a fund equity. When you look at the activity of the proposed year, FY25 revenues compared to expenses and so on, we expect that cash to improve actually by $626,000, which is that bottom line figure also in yellow, which means that to start the new fiscal year, this time next year, council will have in excess of $8.5 million as a residual balance. If you'll switch the thing for me. Within the water fund, the water distribution fund. And so that gives you opportunity to work on bigger projects, because you know the rate of replacement isn't stellar, even in the water fund. Gives you a lot to look at in terms of some of the capital that needs attention here. And again, we wouldn't ever bring forward a proposal that says, hey, we got all this extra money in water. Why don't we help our poor cousin sewer out and give them some help? Because sewer is not doing as well. And that's not because of anything mysterious or anything that council isn't aware of, but it's a smaller fund for sure, and just isn't as aggressive as water. This is what we shared with you back during the rate hearings, and this is what we're seeing right now. Had we not told you about the factors that are involved here, you would have every reason to be alarmed. But given that we are using the sewer fund to leverage some large grants, namely the grant that we just received from the Business Council, that's taking a bite out of the reserves here a little bit, that is pushing this performance further down than you would otherwise anticipate or expect. But this is a planned behavior. We knew this was going to be the case when we pursued these large grants. And indeed, we are mindful that this has some effect on our performance. Now, without a doubt, when you look at the tail end of that blue line, council has time to adjust rates in such a way, or adjust the timing of our projects in such a way that that blue line can respond much more favorably for the out years that this chart captures. However, if you were to take away 1 cent in its relationship to the sewer fund, we shift from a mustard colored line to a blood red line that travels very precipitously into the, losing money to being broke much quicker than you would otherwise want or anticipate. And that's just to see the critical nature 1 cent has by way of relationship with the sewer fund. Let's go ahead then and move into the worksheet here. What you're seeing is this relationship in numbers. Certainly the year starts well for the sewer fund with a $2.8 million cash balance. That does change, however, when you see the next number in yellow. with regard to the response that the activity in the sewer fund incurs over the next year. And as you know, as I've just explained, that's due in large part to the changes in capital that we expect and are pursuing. That loss, so to speak, that you see in the form of that $1.6 million has the effect of reducing your cash balance to 1.2 to start the fiscal year here in the next year. And so during the rate hearings, when we do have more history to be able to share with you and so on, to wrap up the end of this calendar year, you'll be able to make real critical decisions as to whether or not this cash balance is appropriate for some of the goals that we will also bring forward to have you consider for this fund, and determine whether or not rates need to adjust there or a reduced capital agenda would be more appropriate, or a combination of both, of course. So you have that to anticipate here coming up by the end of the calendar year and into the new fiscal year. So that's the sewer fund. Let's talk about wastewater treatment if we could. Wastewater treatment has a synergistic relationship with the sewer fund in that a lot of what we pay by way of sewage treatment comes right out of the sewer fund, as you might imagine. Similar to what water distribution does with water treatment, the regional water program. The wastewater treatment pro forma is certainly more positive, particularly when you look at what it was that we anticipated for the fiscal year back in December. Pursuant to some other grants, or excuse me, to some other capital programs, however, that you approved in recent months, that has had the effect of pushing the performance further toward a less optimal condition, operating condition, as you can see here with the blue line being demonstrated with actual data that we've collected since the time that you approved the rates. The trajectories for the wastewater treatment plant is still very positive, however, and I would tell you all of that margin that you see between the blue line and the green line moving in the out years is important, because indeed we need all of that leveraging capacity that that margin would indicate, so that we can tackle some larger wastewater treatment plant projects that are on our very near horizon. And undoubtedly, with the capital work that Tom and Bruce and their teams are undertaking right now, you're going to get a very clear view of when we come to you in the rate hearings at the end of this year as well. That again, that margin of dollars that you see between those green and black lines and the blue line will be needed for. Okay, so that upward trajectory is important because we want upward trajectory, but we also need those savings. All right. Any question at all about the wet utilities at this point?
Is the wastewater plant, those out years dollars, is that being driven by some of the EPA guidelines that we're looking at coming down the road?
Mr. Mayor, certainly the capital plan that we will be bringing to you in its updated fashion will undoubtedly anticipate some of those regulations. We will be able to tell you more about that at that point in time. And if you'd like more detail than what I've just given you, I can invite Tom and Bruce up to give you some of that insight.
The main thing I wanted to do was to let the public know, if they're looking at that we aren't just we already kind of have a feeling of where the EPA regulations are going. We're going to have to add more things to clean up our water better, to put it back into the river. And that is what is driving those costs, as opposed to us just arbitrarily doing something. These are being forced on us by the federal government, so to speak. And that was the point I wanted to bring up when people were looking at this, is this isn't just a whim of ours that let's go out and beautify it.
Amen. Amen. I think that's a fair characterization.
Very good. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yep. Now I brought up another question.
What you get for so long, man? Every time to think. Just two short questions if I could.
Sure.
I believe the current annual subsidy for water and sewer from the 1 cent is 2.6 million, but they're usually joined together. And so I was curious if anybody knows the breakdown exactly.
The sewer fund, Mr. Mayor, if I could, Counselor, takes on $475,000 a year. And so the balance between the 2.5 and the 475 is what water consumes in the balance.
Thank you. And then my follow-up was, in the spirit of, I asking about streets, Councilor Pollock asking about deferred maintenance for public-owned buildings. I was curious, do we have any sort of assessment for the condition of sewers and water mains? Is all that maintenance and replacement captured in like a 5-year capital plan, or do we have any sort of assessment tool telling us what the condition is of our infrastructure as far as that goes? I've complained in the past before that I think our current replacement schedule is 0.03% annually for water mains and 0.03% for sewer mains. And so I guess I would just like to know, I'm still not sure 3 years later whether our current funding amount is keeping our infrastructure at the same, or if like streets, we're just getting slower, farther and farther behind the ball. So I'm just.
Yeah. Mr. Mayor, maybe I could invite Tom to come up for a second and talk to us a little bit about the Raft-Telus study. That's going to give us that study, that body of work, to give you just a little bit of a taste here, is going to give us a feel for what our rate structure needs to look like in order to accommodate just exactly what you're talking about. So Tom, if you don't mind talking a touch about what that means to us and when we can get that data.
Yes, thank you. Mayor, councilors, Raft-Telus has been engaged to do rate studies for the water and the sewer. And in the old days, people like the employees at Raft-Telus worked for some of the big engineering companies. And then they've gone off and started these kind of smaller kind of boutique companies that just do rate studies. And Bruce has been engrossed in this. And I've been involved a little bit as well on weekly conference calls, but it's amazing the granularity they go down into details. And for example, on when they're looking at water, they're looking at the cost of providing service to residential customers versus the cost of service providing it to landscape versus cost of service to provide it to commercial customers. And so they get very, very granular on how the water rates come down. On the water side, Raft-Telus is looking at a tiered water rate. And a tiered water rate is one that in the old days, they called it conservation rate. That is, if you use a reasonable amount of money, we'll charge, or a reasonable amount of water, we'll charge you that reasonable rate. This is the cost of service. If you're kind of wasteful, we're going to charge a little higher rate. And if you're really, really wasteful, we're going to charge you a higher rate yet. And I think the last rate study we looked at had 4 different tiers in there. Because there are certain people that are just frankly very wasteful with water. And the first water that comes out of our system right now, 6 to 8 million gallons out of the well field, that's pretty easy water to produce. So we pull it out of the well field, we ozonate it, we chlorinate it, and we pump it into the system. When we get above that and people are using more and more water, we're having to treat the water in the North Platte River. Well, when we have a lot of rain like we did last Monday, Tuesday, I always look at the river and go, and it's hard to treat chocolate milk and make it drinking water, but Bruce and his amazing staff do it. And again, it has to meet all those drinking water requirements. And so the Raft-Telus study is really looks at all that very granular nature. And, we're looking forward to coming to a presentation with council this summer on that, on both the water and the sewer side. And then ultimately, probably in November, to talk about a rate increase. And again, this tiered water rate study really, it changes the dynamics dramatically on how much people get charged for water. The people that are at the lower end that aren't using much water, there's very little impact on their rates, but the people in the high end that use more and more water, they're paying quite a bit more money. On the age, just to parse out a little bit, because I heard about the age of the water, the water master plan, I think, is in very good shape. That shows that the age of our water infrastructure and what needs to be replaced. Bruce and I are working together, part of the reason I wanted to split those two up, because we really need to work harder on those capital improvement plans for 5, 10, and even 20 years. 21s get kind of rough. The sewer side, we have a lot of age, and it's interesting. I was during the North Platte Interceptor sewer a little over a year ago. You know, there's a 100-year-old sewer main we crossed. It was a clay tile sewer main. It was in great shape. So it's really fascinating. Water, not so much. You have a 100-year-old water main, it's probably caused me a lot of problems, but it's interesting when you have these old clay tile sewers. They can be in pretty great shape. And I can tell you on the North Platte Interceptor sewer, I personally started looking at that sewer 17 years ago, I believe it was. I was sub-consultant to CH Trim Hill on that to look at the condition of that sewer. And, you know, I could bore you for a lot of time on that one, but it's in rough shape. You know, we need to continue lining that. I'm tickled to death that we've got that $5 million that's dedicated towards that project this year. Doesn't finish it by any stretch of the imagination, but it does allow us to go hit those very critical areas. And right now, the folks in wastewater collection are out there inspecting that main. They've got some really cool cameras, these aim shoot cameras, where we can get in there and look at that and kind of monitor the deterioration of that main. Concrete main being attacked by H2S, which turns into sulfuric acid and turns the concrete into what looks kind of like oatmeal. I hope I didn't go off script too far, but I let you know about the Raptalis, but also give you a little input on the water and sewer distribution and collection.
Sure. Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Thank you.
If we could look at the numbers in a little more granular fashion here, the wastewater treatment fund started the year off very strongly with $1.4 million unencumbered cash. With the activity of the fiscal year that we project, we anticipate that cash to be impacted a little bit to start the new fiscal year at the end of this fiscal year we're talking to you about tonight with $1.2 million in the wastewater treatment fund, which essentially starts that blue line back up if our model serves correctly. So decent cash position for the wastewater treatment fund as well. One of the things that there seems to be some misunderstanding over, or at least there has been historically, and that is with regard to the solid waste funds. To be very, very clear, solid waste funds do not receive any infusions of 1 cent funding. We may have used it in the past for projects or maybe an equipment purchase, maybe, but in terms of a routine operational subsidy like you see, or a capital subsidy routinely in the water and wastewater funds, that's not the case for sanitation. And so the relationship that sanitation has internally between the success of the refuse fund and the support that the bail fund needs as a result, that relationship is really important. And the time that you spend talking about solid waste is equally as important, because we don't want that to go upside down anytime soon. You recall what the refuse fund and the role that it has. The refuse fund is essentially the fund that's responsible for the commercial services, if you will, of sanitation, the curbside services that we all enjoy. We told you that the fund would do this back in December, and pursuant to what we're seeing now, indeed, we're seeing activity be a little less than what we hoped. Not by much, thankfully, but certainly not to the extent that we had hoped back in December. Undoubtedly, when council looks at this, council may want to determine the worksheet, please. Council may want to determine a different approach as it relates to rates and or purchasing to take place in the end of the year. But without a doubt, what you're seeing is the need for purchasing equipment and some of those large rolling stock expenses that we just can't avoid. And so accordingly, that end result is 483,000, in the hole, so to speak. So my urge to council would be aware of this, know that we have this on our horizon, and be prepared to make some of those tough decisions in the at the end of the year to determine if you think this is tolerable and for how long. Because you alone get to choose how long the refuse fund reacts in this position or should react in a different way. Okay. And again, you do that by looking at rates, or you do that by reducing purchases. And sometimes a combination of both.
Go ahead.
Thanks, Mayor. Thanks, Carter. I guess I'm a little confused about the performance of that fund because I'm referencing an article from December of last year, so not even 5-6 months ago, where we changed the solid waste fees. We increased the bale fill tipping fee from 55 to 75. But anyway, we had a plan to increase residential trash collection from 25.50 to 28.30 this year, and then up to 31.40 next year. So is that performance formula based still on the expectation that we would raise rates in 2025 to 31.40?
Mr. Mayor, Councilor, the short answer is yes. But if I could get Tom and his team to come up and walk us through a little more of that detail, I'd sure appreciate that.
As while he's walking down, my question is going to be a little bit along that as to why we went from the dashed to the solid. And is that due to the increase in cost that we're seeing, like for the compactor that we just ordered and some of that type of thing? Or are we not getting the revenue in that we had anticipated from outside from tipping fees?
Sure.
Mayor, councilors, the first thing that's interesting, and this occurs in solid waste, as well as water and wastewater, and that is that the refuse collection, they're subject to the rate increases at the bale fill. So that's what the fees we're charging ourselves to bury that trash out there, compact it and bury it. So when we raise the rates at the bale fill by 26%, that's where this dip's coming in. And then we didn't want to hit the rates as hard on the residential. The other piece, the mayor frankly just hit the nail on the head. It's the age of our rolling stock. And I'm always reviewing on a weekly basis, hopefully more often, invoices that come in. And it's amazing how many $20,000, $30,000 and $40,000 bills I have for working on garbage trucks, residential site collection garbage trucks, because our rolling stock is old. And we looked at a lot of this data during the budgeting process back towards December and January. And it's amazing how the maintenance costs for these 6-year-old, I think roughly, if memory serves me correct, garbage trucks, how it just goes through the roof. But we haven't been able to get any new ones. And there's some fascinating reasons why garbage trucks are not available, and I won't bore you with those details, but we've got additional maintenance costs. And then we're finally catching up this year, but we've had that impact on maintenance costs on these older trucks. We're catching up and getting delivery of, I think, 2 trucks this year, but then also working against us is that larger tipping fee at the landfill, where it went up 26%, but that pulls us away. Spent a lot of time with Cindy Langston and, whether we should be worried about this, and she's not worried at all. And it's roughly about a 10%. When you look at that 293 to 262, it looks, depending on the scale of the graph, it looks a little more worse, but it's not that surprising of a number when we compare with it. We're trying to project it. So I can tell you personally, and as far as Cindy's concerned, it's not where we want to be, but I'm not worried about our trajectory. I think we're pulling out of this quickly, and without a doubt, what's whacking us the hardest is that tipping fee and the age of our rolling stock.
So you're throwing Cindy under the bus for part of it.
I hope I didn't do that. I rely heavily on Cindy, so the last thing I want to do is throw her under the garbage truck.
I just had to tease you about that. I think you had a question, Amber.
Yeah, thank you. So when we look at something like this, it, looks like if we make no changes, we're dipped into the reserves for 3-ish years. What's our statutory obligation to pull ourselves up above that black line? Is there a time limit on that? Is it, if we're moving in the right direction? What sort of requirements do we have, in terms of that obligation?
Mr. Mayor, Counselor, very good question. I appreciate you asking that. The fact is, the only statutory obligation you have is to be sure that you use the fund that you derive in that fund for operations that are consistent with the business you're trying to support. And without a doubt, statutes do not dictate the types of savings that you need to have. The ways in which you leverage reserves to buy capital, none of that is statutorily mandated. And I hope we don't go that way here in this state either.
Follow up. So it's not acceptable to use reserve money for a brief window of time to achieve some of these needed things that we need to, as long as we've got a plan to keep it above that line fairly, regularly.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, Counselor, that is true. And when you look at this figure here in the middle, 2 entries above that final yellow number, that 2.7 million is telling the story right there. That is your culprit. And when you look at, and you'll see this discussed a little bit in the narrative, when you look at what it is that we have on the agenda for this 2.7 million, we're talking about a $420,000 side load vehicle. We need 2 of them. We're talking about a street sweeper to replace the aged street sweepers that we're working on continuously. Now that's $320,000. You're looking at a front load garbage truck. We need 2 of them, and those are $386,000 a piece. That $2.7 million is getting eaten up with those purchases that we have been punting for quite a few years now in order to help the refuse fund be a little more sustainable over time. We can only punt those purchases for so long is the problem. And as you can see in the pro forma, if we can look at that again real quickly, we don't anticipate that negative position, if you will, to be that long. The good news is though, again, you can dictate how those curves react to the factors you control, which is unlike the general fund because you can barely control any factors in the general fund. You control all the factors in the refuse fund as well as the bail fill fund. You bet.
And I guess the worst part about that, I've got you, but I guess part of the worst part about that is we have to commit that money now, which shows up here, and we won't see those trucks for 2 years.
Yes, sir. Correct.
That's the sad part about it, because we've punted and punted thinking, oh, we'll just go out and buy one. And now we've had all of these delays in the supply chain. And so they're inadvertently getting punted when they show up another 2 years down the road, which winds up really chewing into the maintenance budget big time.
Fair point.
Okay.
Thank you.
Ms. Sullivan.
Thank you. So that 2.7 that you said is it's like the non-operating cost, for 25. I mean, what can I think, to Amber's point, if it really is that, period of time that's relatively minor in the grand scheme, I think that's one consideration, but is year 26 going to have similar non-operating expenditures that come up? Like, what can we anticipate? And if you don't know now, I think that information will be helpful as we consider that, because if it appears, oh, this is a short-term thing, I think that's one policy decision versus these costs are gonna keep coming up so I don't know if you know that now, but if you do, great. If not, knowing that next time we have this conversation would be helpful.
And that will absolutely be the case, Madam Counselor. We will, Mr. Mayor, undoubtedly have the opportunity to review with you what our near horizon looks like, what our less than near horizon looks like, and how that will implicate the performance curves that you analyze so closely.
So that curve there wouldn't now include any of those foreseen 26, 27 non-operating costs?
No, they will. They do.
It does.
It
include
does.
now.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
right. That's why you're seeing that extended stay, if you will, beneath the
Mhm,
optimal operating condition, because not only do you have some recovery at stake,
mhm.
you will also have some purchases that need to be made as well. So I would tell you though, that the 2.7 that you're seeing right now in the form of some 5 vehicles at an average of 320,000 apiece, is probably a higher watermark than we normally see. And so, I don't anticipate that being replicated year in and year out, but we do have to keep ahead of those curves as much as we can. And so having years of no rolling stock purchases is probably unlikely as well.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Gonna say along those lines, don't we, and I'm trying to remember now, but when we do those graphs, aren't we looking at anticipated expenditures through the next, 5 to 7 years?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, right. And
So
the
that-
capital plan that we
Yes.
submitted to you should have all those entries in there, at least for the 4 years ahead of now.
Well, that's what I was getting at, is this graph goes through 29. And we have anticipated those equipment replacements and some of those things that we know about, barring a major snafu. We have anticipated those out through 29 in all of these scenarios. So those are all in there. The water fund, the bale fill, even the opening and the closing of the pits, the bale fill pits and everything are included in all of these graphs. So, yeah. Any other questions? Next,
Well, let's look at the Belleville Fund.
speaking of bale fill,
That's right.
there we close and open a pit.
Yep, pretty much. Yep, pretty much. And that green line is meant to indicate what we hope to achieve in time for the closure of the next pit and opening, if you will.
That's what I was getting at, is that's why that build and then the sudden drop is the closing and the opening.
You got it. You got it.
That particular one will continually look like a sawtooth at some form along there because of that build and close, build.
You got it. That's right. That's right. And the good news is for the Belleville Fund, it's actually performing quite a bit better than we expected, this time, 6 months ago or whatever. So the outlook for the Belleville Fund, doesn't look too bad. So the revenue enhancements that you talked about are helping. We also have some other industrial revenue coming on that we didn't expect. That's giving some benefit here as well. And so the foray beneath the curve that we expected to occur, we don't think it's gonna happen for the Belleville Fund. And so that's really good news. We just have to be sure that we can see similar benefits in the refuse fund when we start to talk coming up in, another 6 months or so. And we'll try to give you plans and ideas that will help the refuse fund as well perform, hopefully, like the Belleville Fund is right now. Doing really well. To look at that in numbers, this is what it looks like. The Belleville Fund is starting out with a fairly small cash balance for the beginning of the fiscal year. We knew that. That's why you saw what you saw in the performance curves earlier. However, pursuant to some revenue again that we did not expect, you will see that come forward in a real positive bottom line at the end of the fiscal year and all of that activity to net a $1.6 million positive cash balance in the Bellfield Fund moving forward. And as you recall from the pro forma curve we just looked at, that number is going to improve if the factors that we understand right now continue into the near future. Good news.
And if I recall right, that number would need to be about 7 million by the time we get to the peak of that sawtooth to be able to close and open
I think you're right, Mr. Mayor. I think that's correct.
in that neighborhood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll be well on our way there by the end of this fiscal year, and that's great news.
Yes.
Very good. Unless there's any other questions about utilities, let's talk about the recreational enterprises.
Got a little more excited about that, Carter.
The excitement was palpable. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Everybody falling asleep out there, so.
Do we need a 5-minute break to get up and stretch and
Yes,
visit the facilities?
I'm looking at a lot of sleepy
Say
faces.
what?
I'm looking at a lot of sleepy faces around the room, so yeah, I think we should.
Is that okay with you,
Of course.
Mr. City Manager?
They're saying
Let's
no.
take about a 5-minute break to stretch. So
Remember, we're getting paid like 50
continue on,
cents an
Mr.
hour
City
for this
Manager.
one.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mayor, Councilors.
Thank you.
Thanks for hanging in there with us.
All right, we get paid 50 cents an hour.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, now I'm done with my thank yous.
No problem, no problem. The next slide really captures most of what we wanted to talk about with regard to subsidies here. And you can follow along and see which ones of interest to you and how they're doing. Just to kind of give you a little bit of a bearing, if you will, for the golf course, for example. We are projecting that for this year, we will finish at about 115%.
Wow.
As of the end of fiscal year 24, you can see that compared to fiscal year 23, that trend's about flat, which is good in this case in that it's above the benchmark for actually making money, operationally speaking. For FY25, we're anticipating that being at around 110%. And frankly, I think it'll be more than that, but that's conservatively what we're anticipating. You can see what we're looking at for the rest of the enterprises there. And we've got other ways in which that can be represented here graphically. But in the interest of time, if you have questions about any of these, we can go into any of them and give you a little more detail or go into other sides of this.
Questions, comments? The only comment I've got is it looks like we're gonna wind up exceeding Hogadon's goal by 12%. So we have increased from free up to $50 for those over 70 for the season pass. I think for those over 75, it ought to be free.
Oh, gosh.
When's your birthday?
Conflict.
I'm already 75, so. Oh, conflict of interest. Well,
How about a new lift?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we've got a chairlift we need to pay for.
I just had to throw that.
Yeah.
There you go, join the ski patrol, they need more people.
I spent 14 years on that. My knees won't let me do it anymore.
Wham, but he can't ski. Just kidding.
Okay. That was it.
No problem. Mr.
I
Mayor,
noticed Alima smiling, so very good.
you'll notice a couple obvious entries that look different than the others. Athletics and cemetery and actually the fort, even though we've been tracking the fort a lot more closely than these others. We are moving forward in the direction pursuant to your passage of the budget, where we are tracking the cemetery in a similar way that some of these recreation enterprises are being tracked, albeit not many people would consider cemetery a recreational enterprise. I get that. We do want it to be an independent cost center, however, that allows us to understand not only what our true cost of doing business is, but where in fact we may have some more revenue opportunities that are unique to that operation that we haven't realized or tried to exploit in the past. So, we'd like to treat the cemetery as an enterprise as well, in the hopes that someday, we'll be able to capture not only 50% of what that recovery would be, but beyond that if possible. The only other thing that I would mention here that isn't captured as an enterprise, and that's mostly because we don't necessarily treat the event center like an enterprise. But we are seeing improvements with respect to the event center as well, the Fort Learning Center. You know that the baseline for the event center is actually closer to $990,000 with respect to what we expect to pay to have that operation and pay the operator. We are anticipating, however, that subsidy is going to come in FY25 more along the lines of $880,000, which is a great improvement, but slow improvement, as you might imagine, given that we've been tracking this slow creep from the high water mark of like 1.2 million downward to this point over the last 6 years or so. And that's great news. We're going in the right direction. And with respect to what Zalima has by way of an outlook for the next fiscal year and beyond, we've got real positive things happening out at the event center, and I'm real excited about the direction that's going. We had some conversation recently about ways in which we think we can improve that. And I would say over the next year, we really need to determine whether or not we're going to make any strides in that respect, whether or not we're going to pursue any alternatives or direction in that regard. And so outside of what you see here, what it is that we've gathered to talk about with regard to the event center, all of which are captured in your narrative, I'd be happy to take any questions about subsidies that you might have.
I'll let you folks go first. It was a tie, so go ahead, Ms. Vice Mayor.
The only reason why the cemetery isn't recreational is because it requires to be mowed and watered. Is that why it's in recreational?
Well,
I mean, it's just seems a little odd.
no, I know, and it's mostly because it's just included on this chart as a separate enterprise. So no, we don't really call it a recreational enterprise, but we are trying to treat it more like an enterprise versus being captured in the park's general fund budget. So not only do we get to see what it is that cemetery does on its own by way of its own cost of business, hopefully going to isolate their revenues as well to try to match those a little more closely and have better goals associated with the ways in which we can make cemetery more self-sustaining. But historically, it's been located in parks. Julie, do you have anything you want to add to that? Do you mind if I?
No, go ahead.
Okay.
Mayor, Vice Mayor. So, you know, Carter really kind of nailed it. Historically, the cemetery, has had revenues going into the general fund, expenses coming out of the general fund, and they were sort of melded together with other revenues and expenses. And so it was difficult for us to track and monitor the performance of that particular operation, which does fall in the Parks Division. So Randy oversees the cemetery operation as he does parks maintenance, golf, and Hogadon. And so, yeah, this is really just included to show you that it is a new enterprise fund that has been created. And it falls in my department, so it was just lumped in with these.
Thank you.
Don't run off. What was your comment, Kyle?
It was gonna be, I'm excited to see that the trajectory on all of those seems to be trending upwards towards greater cost recovery. So, that gets me pumped. I guess my question was more so just a curiosity for aquatics. From FY 19 to 23, we had 51% cost recovery, and then I think in 24 it was lower, 30-something percent, and then we're trending up at like 41% again projected for this year. So I was just curious why we seem to be on a recovery trend for aquatics compared to like average for fiscal year 19 through 23. I was just curious for more context about that. Okay.
Ruth?
Mayor, counselors, I think we could say that aquatics was one of the hardest hit funds during COVID. And so that's why we're kind of recovering. 2021 were really low years in the aquatics fund, and Edwin and anybody can come down and correct me if I'm wrong. In addition to that, the roof closure through a portion of 23 definitely had an impact, or excuse me, 24 this year definitely has had an impact. And we'll feel that impact again because the aquatic center is closed again for their phase 2 construction. And so we will see that spill over, albeit not as bad as the first closure that occurred. That's only 4 months ago we reopened, right? So, but I will let Edwin add a little bit more color since he's been in this one for much longer than I have.
Mayor, Counselor, for the fiscal year 25, I did not do or 24, I did not do construction for that. And construction ended up taking an extra month than we were planning because of delays. So that's really why it's at 33%. And hopefully it's only going to be 3 months for this phase. So it's trending upwards, and then we can hopefully get back up to the 51 to 58% in fiscal year 26.
Thank you. Again, just to satiate my curiosity, you mentioned COVID, Zulema, and that's why I was surprised FY 19 through 23 was higher cost recovery because that was peak COVID. But I'm wondering if, going back to our conversation about Paradise Valley being closed for temporary replacements, and at least I came to the realization that we saved money when pools are closed. And so I wonder if COVID actually worked to our benefit in regards to cost recovery. Because like, the overhead, employee staffing, and all of those things. If we close the pools, we're not having to pay employees to lose money and have to subsidize that program, so.
Mayor, Counselor, we actually saw the highest cost recovery percentage in fiscal year 21 because of COVID closing PV and Washington that year.
It's hard to lose money when you don't have the doors open.
Exactly.
Gotcha. All right. Well, thank you. Otherwise, that all looks awesome.
And I had a question about the rec center, because I noticed our cost recovery dropped 5% from last year. Because according to that other chart. Go back one.
Go back to 3.
Was it 3? Okay. Keep on going back. There you go. The rec center, last year we were at 49 and you're projecting 44.
Mayor, counselors, so the rec center, you'll see over the years is sort of an anomaly, right? Primarily, the biggest impact for FY 24 is the change in the sports and athletic fund. So sports and athletic became its own fund in fiscal year 24. Historically, all of the athletic maintenance was in parks, and all of the sports expenses and revenues were in the recreation center fund. And so we picked those two apart, created its own fund, and that definitely had an impact in the rec center. Although positive, because we weren't incurring all of the expenses of sports in the rec center fund this year. So I believe that 44% is very, very conservative. I believe that our revenues will be higher based on the good work that Jennifer Harvey and her team are doing. But it was a conservative estimate, and certainly I'd invite her to come add anything she might want to.
You're okay then, but basically.
Mayor, counselors, so yes, our numbers kind of are a little wonky and that I do see, but all the projections, everything that I want to do and accomplish at the rec center, I do have a feeling we're going to go far and above what the numbers are projected right now, so.
I just didn't know if there was a closure or something major going on that way, so.
No, just, I'm always nervous about, when we separate things and we're looking at things, I don't want to go, yes, I'm going to achieve this, but I do have a lot of projects planned and hopefully take off in the next year, so, that
Very
should
good.
go up.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it. But that was the one thing that really stuck out. Very good. Anybody else have any other questions? Thank you all. Appreciate it. Very good answers.
Mr. Mayor, we talked about the Fort Wyoming Center, and we talked about what we think it's going to do in FY 25. And that led me to the point that for FY 25, we think we need some direction with respect to the Fort Wyoming Center. That won't be the only thing, however, that we need direction for in fiscal year 25. And so I guess I would want to take advantage of this time that I have with you right now to just give you a couple of ideas and things that we think you ought to be thinking about. And then end with a question as to whether or not that would be the item that we need to talk about tomorrow night in more detail.
Okay.
Given the timeliness of that particular item. Before we get there, looking at the things that I think we need to be looking out for next year, this is what I would start with. We've already talked about the fact that a master plan for the wastewater treatment plant is pending. That is right around our corner. I would also say that you also have the Parks Master Plan as an item to look forward to seeing here very soon, and ostensibly making some decisions about in the next fiscal year. We've already also as well talked about the Casper Business Center. We're hoping that that work starts in earnest, and we'll be asking you for a bid approval I'm really hopeful that that would be the fall coming up here real soon. Subsidy reduction strategies are also things that we will continue to work on. And I would just plug the idea that when Councilor Pacheco was talking about tough decisions, I think that master plan is going to encourage tough decisions. And I think the implementation strategies with respect to reducing the subsidies we just saw is going to require some brave decision making as well. And so I hope that you're up for that. I hope you're okay with that and will assist us in moving in that direction, because 25 will help us get going in that regard. Looking at the next segment of ideas, we really need to know what to do with Metro. We think we'll make a lot of progress in that regard, not only in the sense of dealing with the physical plant, which we all know we need to, but also with respect to memorializing relationships in that respect and making progress there. Moving forward with long-term contracts of some form is invariably going to be something that FY25 is going to be there. We talked about implementation strategies as it relates to our employees. I'm hoping that that can be done no later than the beginning of the year. And believe it or not, our agreement with Advanced Casper will expire this coming year. And so we need to tackle that too, which shouldn't be horribly much of a heavy lift, but will certainly be something for this council to consider before the year's end. But the granddaddy of things that we need to talk about sooner than later is whether or not council wants to move forward with a 6-cent proposal. Now that clock is winding down as we speak. And so my ask would be that we get some direction tomorrow night with respect to whether or not we move forward with the November ballot question. And I mean this November. And the reason I say that is because we are at the unique crossroads where all of the little towns have said they don't want to pursue a 6-cent proposal for a countywide scenario. We have a new statute in the books that says in that circumstance where a 6-cent does not currently exist, a singular municipality can go forward in a citywide initiative question on the ballot for Casper taxpayers only and voters only, if you will, to determine whether or not a ballot that looks like this or that includes other ideas and projects is supportable. And so we are suggesting that now might be that time. And if it is, we need to go to the commissioners within a date certain to see if the commissioners will allow the city of Casper to occupy the ballot to take a question to city of Casper voters only with regard to a menu of options or a singular capital option or whatever it is that you think is most appropriate to consider as we go into our new fiscal year. So, Mr. Mayor, my hope is that we can tackle at least this topic for tomorrow night. Because again, the time is running out to where we can make a November ballot if council has that interest and desire to move forward. Because if you don't, you can tell me that tomorrow night and we will halt progress. On the other hand, if we can move forward and you think we should, we really need to in order to make the right timeline.
It appears to be 8:30 tonight. Are we all willing to continue this meeting till tomorrow night? Meet at 4:30 again? That be your appropriate time?
If that pleases the council.
Meet at 4:30 again tomorrow night to tackle the proposed continuation of the other things that he mentioned along with the 6th end. Or are we all in agreement with the continuation of the meeting?
I'll be a little late tomorrow because I've got a client at work, so I'll be after 5 o'clock by the time I can get here.
Or if we would,
Yeah, I have a conflict until I'll be here about almost 6. And I have a board meeting. Push it later? I mean, I don't know, I don't think it'll take us 4 hours to talk about.
That'd be great if you could push it a little later.
Sorry, for my clarification, what else is on the agenda other than talking about 6 cents?
I thought you were wanting some direction on, go back 2 slides.
Mr. Mayor, just to set the table for the slides that we're about to pull up. That was, those items on that list was really meant to sort of set the table for fiscal year 25 as a whole. Not necessarily for any pending direction I need right now.
I thought you were maybe needing something along those lines to help you with what we're gonna do with our FY25 budget, if we needed to start incorporating some of those things into that budget. So I was thinking you were needing some direction on some of those items as well.
But certainly if council, Mr. Mayor, has an inclination now to provide direction on this list that Peter here's about to pull up. Then I would take it without a doubt. Without a doubt, I would take it. And I would consider them later if you like.
But I thought some of those things were some things that we maybe needed some discussion on tomorrow night to help them out to finish up our budget, along with the 6 cent.
They are they not?
I would say, Mr. Mayor, the most pending item
Is the 6 cent.
for us is the 6 cent, without a doubt. Now, I would also say though, to try to flesh out the answer a little bit more for Counselor Gamroth. One of the things that council requested was a little more fundamental detail as to how to establish a budget and what some of the revenue issues are and what some of the investment strategies are and that kind of thing. So we are prepared to cover those kinds of things as well tomorrow night if council would like. But it's absolutely discretionary what it is you'd like to see happen tomorrow night.
You're looking at me, so I'll give you my 2 cents.
Go for it.
I don't know if I necessarily have anything along those lines. I do want to talk about the 6 cent and potentially what items would be included on it. My personal preference, and I don't want to obligate anyone else in the room to have to stay later tonight. I'd rather bang that out in 30 or 40 minutes tonight than come back tomorrow for 90 minutes personally. But if we got a full agenda tomorrow and we got a couple hours of discussion ahead of us, I don't want to keep everyone here till midnight necessarily, but again, if 6 cents is going to take us 30 minutes, I'd rather do it tonight than kind of stretch out a meeting tomorrow to feel justified in getting everyone back together. 2 cents.
I say the same, grit and grind, get her done. I mean, why don't we start? And if it starts to take us past 9:15, then we reconvene tomorrow. But I mean, I already feel relatively comfortable with where I stand on 6 cents, so.
Yeah, I mean, me too. That's why I don't feel like I need a whole bunch of times.
Everybody wanted to just
I think we have
show
to try.
grit.
Yes, grit and grind.
Are you folks, you willing to discuss it tonight?
Mr. Mayor, I would say that that is certainly something we can tackle. My only problem is if you would like further insight with regard to some of the statutory implications, that's probably more of an Eric question, and he's not with us this evening. Certainly he would be more than prepared to tackle it tomorrow night or another time. But if you're comfortable that in concept, we're ready to go, then we'll prepare a proposal and we'll have that proposal ready in conjunction with the opportunity to ask questions in the pre-meeting leading up to that resolution. So we can tackle it however you'd like.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, I don't wanna.
Oh, no, I was along your lines, is that if we could get it done in 30 minutes, we stayed here versus tomorrow night. By the same token, if we think this is gonna be a 2-hour discussion, we probably need to postpone it till tomorrow night.
Yeah, I think I've stated my interest in, we had a lot of, I mean, these are all high dollar items. We don't have anywhere near enough resources to tackle them all, even with like a 10 to 15-year capital plan. I would much prefer the voters just have those items, line item on a budget or on a ballot, and just tell us what they are comfortable with paying for and taking their direction on that. So yeah, I mean, that's where I don't really feel like I need more discussion other than just legally, I want to make sure we're doing everything on the up and up. But
I concur with that. I feel pretty comfortable where I sit with 6 cents.
Same.
Sounds like basically it's a done deal. We don't need to deal with it. We're all, oh,
And then I have a question.
do it.
Amber has a question, then I have.
Yeah, okay, I saw Amber's. Very good.
Yeah, I don't really have a question, but I would just say, I think we all are aware of the needs that are on this list. They've been sort of looming around for the better part of the time that I've been on council, with no real direct path to get any of them funded. And so I think it's appropriate to ask. I think we should see where the community's priorities lie. And if they have an appetite to get some of these projects up off the ground sooner than later, is if the answer is no, then we'll continue to let them loom and see if another opportunity presents itself. But, I certainly have an interest in getting some of these moving ahead. And so if this is a pathway to do it, and the community supports it, then I think that's the way to go.
I think these are great ideas. I guess I'm just curious. So if the general public decides that they do not want this and they do not support this, so a no vote, they didn't put anything down, then that would essentially be a no vote, correct?
No.
Is that how that would, no?
Could they have an option that says, I don't support any of these, or I don't support the 6 cent?
Or
If they leave it blank, my understanding is that it's tabulated from the total number of people who filled this particular question out.
That's good, yeah.
that's
Last
what I
I
was trying
heard
to
from
figure
legal,
out.
again,
how
Eric's not
that
here, so we
looks.
should get a memo or something, but it's my understanding that a no vote or a leave it blank is neither a no nor a yes, if you're just not tabulated in the total number of folks who answered the
Who did.
question.
Okay.
That's what I understand as well.
Okay.
But we'd get further clarification.
We certainly can, absolutely.
Yeah.
That we can.
So are we good then to go ahead with this and?
Steve, I want to clarify something. If it's okay. Is this a good time for a question?
Absolutely.
Okay, so my understanding is if we put these 6 things on the ballot, and there, so it's either all or nothing, correct? It's not like a line item. The public's not being asked to vote for each individual project separately, correct?
No, they will be asking to vote for each one individually. So you could wind up with a metro, a fire station, and nothing else.
Okay, that's what I wanted to clarify. I didn't recall that being the case in previous ballots. I didn't know that was an option, so.
It wasn't on It wasn't on the previous one, but that has been the decision on any more that we do, is that we give them a shopping menu and let the public decide.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much.
So, Mr. Mayor, just to be abundantly clear, council gets to propose whatever list they would like as the ballot language that they want the commissioners to support showing up in a citywide ballot. This is just an assemblage of ideas. It really isn't meant to be the list that is vetted and ready to rock and roll. You get the choice to make as it relates to what you want to see on the ballot. So the other thing I'd want to make clear too is, some of the conversation that I'd like the attorney to have with you is with respect to, how the statute reads pursuant to when this actually sunsets. Because there's some interpretation that would suggest that a ballot of this nature would need to sunset in 2 years. And therefore, you know, whatever you collect in the 2 years is what you apply towards whatever project survives. And so you probably ought to understand some of the difficulties and complexities that if indeed that's the parameter that we have to live with pursuant to the statute, what that looks like and how it could, you know, dictate what this ballot reads like. So be aware that that too is a factor we gotta navigate here.
Is this something, how long would you anticipate that taking?
That discussion?
Yes.
Is it a discussion or is it just, does Eric just have a position on it?
Mr. Mayor, Counselor, it's a position that you need to be aware of, in regards to what it is you propose to the commission.
What I was wondering about, and I would ask the rest of council as well, is instead of having another meeting tomorrow night, which it sounds like a lot of people here would be running late for a 4:30 or really not wanting one, is that for our June 4th regular council meeting, instead of the pre-meeting starting at 5:30, if we would move that pre-meeting up to 5 o'clock, if that would give us then the half hour or so, or even more if we needed in that pre-meeting to go over these questions, would give us a week to think about, do we want these? Do we want more? Do we want less? And basically put that discussion as our pre-meeting for the 4th and still delay tomorrow night. I see a head shaking yes there. I see one there.
When's your deadline that it has to be presented to the county before we can get this on the budget? Ballot?
The deadline for the county is actually the very early part of September. But I would treat that as more of a drop dead. There better not be any questions at that point with respect to what's being submitted to the ballot. So I'm suggesting time is of the essence, because if we do run into snags or the commissioners have other questions and homework we need to do, those delays are going to push us right up against that drop dead time frame. So September sounds like it's far away, but the reality is
It's not.
it really is.
Yeah. Would that work for you as far as our time frame and everything?
You bet. You bet.
Everybody willing to come in at 5 on the 4th instead of 5:30? Looks like, if that works for you, looks like that's where council is. I've got a thumb there as well, so. I'm in.
You bet.
So we're done then, let's do it. We're not gonna go tomorrow night then, so I am gonna spend another 10 minutes or so, but be quick for council around the table, since we're not having a meeting tomorrow night.
I didn't bring anything. I thought we were skipping that one.
Yeah.
Very good. You're skipping things too, aren't you, Kyle?
I don't have anything, honestly.
Very good. Amber,
No.
Jenna? Ray?
Do have a lot to go over today. I'm done.
Continue on. Ms. Vice Mayor,
I don't have anything.
the only thing that I was going to bring up is the two chiefs, police and fire, along with the vice mayor and the city manager and I went to Washington last week. We met with all three of our congressional delegation with FEMA for the fire department grants. We also met with DOJ and their COP section of that for police department grants. Both of our chiefs gave excellent presentations. I need you to come up here and explain this. They both gave excellent presentations to their respective departments, FEMA and DOJ, and to our congressional delegation. All three members of our congressional delegations said they would send letters of support to those organizations supporting those grants. And if all of it works out well, we could wind up with between about $4.5 and $6.5 million. So it looked like it was some time very well spent in playing the game, so to speak, for helping us get some needed money for the extra firefighters for a while, for police cars, for those types of things. So I wanted to let people know that's what we did. I want to thank both of the chiefs and the vice mayor and the manager for arranging all of this, and for Jackie for getting all of that taken care of, and our tour guide, so to speak, that ferreted us through all of that, and the help from the staff in putting together the grants and the things that we're looking for. So it was more than just us, it was everybody involved in the team. So on behalf of the council, I wanted to thank everybody. And I will now shut up and say we're going.
Thanks, everybody.